Your parents are supposed to be the first people who love you unconditionally, the ones who brought you into this world and raised you through every stage of life. But in these cases, that sacred bond was shattered in the most unthinkable way. Not by accident, not in self-defense gone wrong, but through deliberate, calculated murder. And the crimes were so brutal, so cold-blooded, that judges looked at children and teenagers and made a decision that would seal their fate forever. Life in prison, with no chance of ever walking free. Today, we're covering every single juvenile killer in the United States currently serving life without parole for murdering their own parents. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about family violence, adolescent psychology, and the youngest killers our justice system has decided can never be rehabilitated. These are the children who became their parents' executioners, and the case is so shocking that courts ruled they should die behind bars. Case number 1. Tristan Noah Borlase was 17 years old when he killed his parents on April 10, 2019. He lived with his mother, Tanya Borlase, and his father, Jeffrey Borlase, in Deep Gap, a small area in Watauga County, North Carolina. Tanya was 44 years old and Jeffrey was 43 years old. The family home was located on Orchard Road, down a long driveway in a wooded area near the Tennessee border. The Borlase family had 8 children in total. Jeffrey and Tanya had 4 biological children and 4 adopted children. Tristan was the youngest of the biological children. His older sisters were named Taylor, Alexis, and Kaya. The 4 adopted children were named Meseret, Melaku, Stephen, and Eli. The family had experienced many difficult years before the murders happened. The family had once lived in Mooresville, North Carolina. In December 2017, they sold their Mooresville home for close to $500,000. After selling that home, the family began to split apart. Some of the adopted children had anger issues related to traumatic experiences from before they were adopted. These children sometimes acted out physically. In 2016, Jeffrey and Tanya sent one of the adopted children, Meseret, to therapeutic foster care in Missouri. In 2017, another adopted son named Melaku did not get along with the other adopted brothers, so Jeffrey and Tristan stayed living with Melaku in Mooresville, while the rest of the family moved to Deep Gap. After the spring school term ended in 2018, Jeffrey and Tristan moved to Deep Gap to join the rest of the family. Melaku was sent to a boarding school for academic and behavioural issues. He was later emancipated by his sister Meseret. During the spring of 2019, only 5 people from the Borlase family were living in the Deep Gap home. These were Tanya, Jeffrey, Tristan, and 2 younger brothers named Stephen and Eli. The home in Deep Gap was not a normal house. It was a 2-story shed that the family was trying to convert into a real home. The house was unfinished and did not have proper electricity or other upgrades. One of Tristan's teachers at school reported to the school counsellor that the home was not fit to live in. Before the family moved to Deep Gap, Tristan and his father and brother drove every weekend from Mooresville to Deep Gap to work on the cabin. A leader from their church group said Tristan would help his mother and father work on the house to make it livable. Tristan testified later in court that he once helped his mother tear out the inside of the home before an inspection. The family was worried that inspectors would discover they were living in a structure that was not good enough to shelter a family. The Borlases took everything down that made it look like people were living in the home. During this time, Tristan either slept at his grandmother's house or in a goat pen on the property. Tristan's relationship with his mother was very difficult. Tanya Borlase was a deeply religious woman who held her children to a strict interpretation of the Bible. According to testimony in court, Tanya would wake Tristan up in the middle of the night and lecture to him for hours. Sometimes these lectures would last until 3 in the morning. Tristan testified that this could happen as many as 4 out of 5 school nights. Other times, Tanya would claim she had received instructions from God and would scream at African and West Indian pieces of art in the home because she believed they were demonic. Tristan struggled with his mental health. In 2017, during a church group trip to Myrtle Beach, a leader from the church said Tristan seemed suicidal. He described himself as hopeless and depressed. Tristan tried to kill himself the next year in 2018. He also struggled at school, even though he scored high on IQ tests. In 2018, he was suspended from school after officials found a knife and vape pen. He received counselling for what school staff called poor judgment and impulsive decision-making. Tristan was a senior at Watauga High School in April 2019. He had been accepted to attend a state university in South Carolina and planned to join the school's track team as a pole vaulter. He was just a few months away from graduating high school and turning 18 years old. His 18th birthday would have been on May 11th, 2019. On the morning of April 10th, 2019, Tristan attended his civics and economics class at Watauga High School. The lesson that day was about how juveniles are punished differently than adults in the criminal justice system. The class specifically taught that juveniles could not receive the death penalty for murder. Earlier that day, Tristan's parents had received a bad report from his high school. The report suggested that Tristan might not graduate. His parents decided to punish him for this bad report. They took away his car keys and his cell phone. They also told him he could not participate on the school's track team until his grades and behaviour improved. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, Tanya sent a text message to her mother, Robin Hahn. In the text message, Tanya said the conversation with Tristan had gone well and that he did not seem upset about losing his phone and car keys. Later that evening, Tristan was inside the home with his mother, while his father was outside doing yard work. Jeffrey was spreading mulch in the yard. According to what Tristan testified in court, his father had asked him to help with the mulch, but his mother told him that he needed to figure out some stuff for school. While Tristan was sending an email to a teacher about his class performance, which his mother dictated to him, they started arguing about religion. Tristan testified that the argument got worse when he was at the table typing another email. He said the argument intensified to a point where he said a curse word and told his mother that was not what Christianity was about. Tristan testified that his mother said he was about to be talking to God or Jesus, whether he wanted to or not. He said she then put her arm around his neck and applied pressure. Tristan said he twisted around and elbowed her. He testified that his mother then got a pair of scissors and came toward him. Tristan said he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her to defend himself, but that she kept coming toward him. Evidence presented at trial showed a different story. The medical examiner testified that Tanya Borlase had 12 sharp force injuries. She also had blunt force injuries and injuries that were consistent with strangulation. The medical examiner said Tanya died from stab wounds to her chest and torso. Tristan stabbed his mother multiple times with the kitchen knife. He also strangled her and hit her with blunt force. After killing his mother inside the house, security camera footage from the home showed what happened next. The video showed Tristan running toward his father in the driveway. Tristan was carrying a large knife. The timestamp on the security video was 6:35 in the evening. Tristan ran up to his father and stabbed him. The knife cut Jeffrey's upper left arm. Jeffrey tried to run away from Tristan. He fell as he tried to escape. Tristan jumped on his father's back and rode him until he fell to the ground. Tristan stabbed his father multiple times in a violent way. Jeffrey Borlase died from multiple stab wounds to his torso. When Tristan finished attacking his father, he walked away. His father was still alive at that moment. Tristan looked back and saw his father on his knees trying to get up. Jeffrey then collapsed back to the ground. Tristan kept walking away. He did not try to help either of his parents. For the next 2 hours, Tristan tried to hide what he had done. He testified that he went back into the house and vomited in the toilet. He then went outside and used a hose to wash down the front porch where blood had gotten on it. He moved his mother's body to the back of the family's pickup truck. He drove the truck closer to the barn. At some point, he covered his father's body with a hammock and leaves. Deputies who later found Jeffrey's body said it was covered with the hammock and had leaves piled on top. When deputies searched the area, they found Tanya's body in the bed of the pickup truck, covered with a blanket. Bags of mulch were piled on top of her. After trying to hide both bodies, Tristan went back into the house. He took a shower. He packed some of his clothes. Around 8:30 in the evening, Tristan drove to his grandmother Robin Hahn's house. She lived only about a mile or so from the family home. Tristan was there to pick up his youngest brother, who his grandmother had been watching during the day. Robin Hahn was surprised to see Tristan. She asked where his parents were. Tristan made an excuse. He said something like they were at the store, though Robin Hahn could not remember his exact words later. Tristan and his younger brother returned to the family home. When his brother asked about blood around the house, Tristan lied. He told his brother he had cut himself while doing dishes. Tristan then left the house again. He went to smoke marijuana with friends. After that, he tried to pick up another brother from work. He testified that he drove back to the house again, that when he saw cars in the driveway, he left. He went to a friend's house to stay the night. The friend's name was Evelyn Faith Jackson. They were classmates and had an English class together. Tristan told Evelyn he had gotten into an argument with his parents. At 10:32 at night on April 10, 2019, a family member called 911. This family member had come to the house and found large amounts of blood throughout the home. The person reported that 3 family members were missing. Their phones were not answering. The caller said they never did this. Deputies from the Watauga County Sheriff's Office were sent to 117 4 Orchard Road in Deep Gap. When deputies arrived, they found blood on stone steps of the walkway that led to the house. Blood was also on the porch and on the doormats just before the entrance to the house. The door was unlocked. Deputies went inside the home. They found blood on the floor just inside the door. There was a blood trail from the entrance going up the main stairs of the house. Warrants show they found blood throughout the entire home. It appeared someone had taken a shower because the bathroom was wet. Deputies continued to search outside the house. They found Jeffrey Borlase's body in the yard. He had puncture wounds to his torso. His body was underneath a hammock and covered with leaves. Deputies kept searching the area. They found a truck in the woods that appeared to have been hidden there. The truck was a 2001 Ford F-150 that belonged to the family. It had been reported missing. Deputies found Tanya Borlase's body in the bed of the truck. She was covered with a blanket, and bags of mulch were piled on top of her. She also had puncture wounds to her torso. A family member told police that they had seen Tristan at the murder scene with blood on his face and hands. A neighbour told news reporters that he heard screams coming from the family home on the night of April 10th. One of the Borlase siblings discovered their father's body at the family's home. This caused more trauma for the family. An arrest warrant for Tristan Noah Borlase was issued on April 11, 2019. This was the day after his parents' bodies were found. On the morning of April 11th, around 6:40 in the morning, Tristan and Evelyn Jackson went to a McDonald's. A receipt found later showed they bought food there at 6:40 in the morning. After that, Tristan and Evelyn headed toward Tennessee. Tristan was driving a black Volkswagen GTI that was registered to his father, Jeffrey. The car had been taken from the crime scene. Around 9 in the morning on April 11th, law enforcement in Watauga County was notified that police in Johnson County, Tennessee were on a traffic stop. A be on the lookout notice had been sent out for the Volkswagen. Officers in Tennessee pulled the car over as soon as it crossed the state border. Tristan Noah Borlase was arrested in Johnson County, Tennessee. Evelyn Jackson was also in the car. Both Tristan and Evelyn had blood on their clothing. Officers searched the Volkswagen. Inside the car, they found a report card for Tristan from Watauga County Schools. They found vape pens and e-cigarettes. There was a plastic bin with snack food. They found the McDonald's receipt. In the glove box, officers found a wallet, a razor, phones, and a bottle of Mio drink liquid. The wallet had Jeffrey Borlase's North Carolina driver's license and his concealed carry permit inside. In the driver's side door compartment, officers found a black pocket knife. The blade appeared to have blood on it. When officers interviewed Tristan in Tennessee, he confessed to killing his parents. During the interview, Tristan admitted that he stabbed his mother first. He said he was never worried his dad would hit him. He also said that he had come back to the house at one point, but saw police cars and left. Tristan was distraught during the interview. He was crying. He told the person on the other end of the phone during a recorded call that he felt cornered in the house. He said he was broken. When asked if it was okay for the person to speak with authorities, he said yes. Photos taken after the interview showed injuries on Tristan's hands. An investigator testified that the wounds could have happened when a knife slipped after it got wet with blood from a first stab. The wounds could also have happened if the knife hit a hard surface like bone and continued to slide. The knives used in the murders had smooth handles, which meant a hand could slip more easily. The wounds were in the same area on both of Tristan's hands, which would be consistent with multiple stab wounds where the knife kept slipping. Tristan was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was 17 years old at the time of his arrest. He was being held without bond. Because he was 17, he was still a juvenile under North Carolina law. North Carolina law says a juvenile is any person under the age of 18 who is not married, emancipated, or in the military. However, North Carolina law also says that juveniles who are 16 and 17 years old are charged as adults for violent felonies. This meant Tristan would be tried as an adult. Tristan's first court appearance was scheduled for May 7, 2019. He was represented by defense attorney Garland Baker. While Tristan was in jail, he repeatedly showed a lack of remorse for his crimes according to court documents. A few weeks after the killings, Tristan even hosted a birthday gathering for himself at the jail. His friends attended this birthday party. The Watauga County community was shocked by the murders. Students at Watauga High School gathered for a moment of silence for the Borlase family. A video of this moment of silence was shared on social media on April 12th. The school superintendent said he made the decision to increase security and police presence at Watauga High School, Hardin Park, and Parkway School as a precaution. Once law enforcement told him there were no dangers to the schools, they went back to normal activities by mid-morning. The trial of Tristan Noah Borlase began on the morning of February 16, 2022. This was almost 3 years after the murders. The trial lasted 9 days. During opening statements, the prosecutor said the jury would find Tristan Borlase guilty at the end of the trial. Defense attorney Garland Baker stated that his client was guilty of murdering his parents. However, Baker said the jury should not find him guilty of first-degree murder. Many witnesses testified during the trial. Family members, friends, and law enforcement officers all took the stand. The prosecution presented evidence that included the security camera footage from the home. They showed the video of Tristan running toward his father with the knife. They presented the knife that was found in the car. They played recordings of phone calls Tristan made from the detention center. They showed photos of Tristan's injuries. They presented testimony from the medical examiner about how both parents died. The defense tried to argue that Tristan was acting in self-defense. They presented evidence about Tristan's difficult home life. They talked about his strict religious upbringing. They mentioned the unfinished home the family lived in. They discussed Tristan's mental health struggles, including his depression and anxiety. They talked about his difficult relationship with his mother. They mentioned the nighttime lectures that could last until 3 in the morning. The defense also presented testimony about problems in the Borlase family. They talked about the adopted children who had behavioral issues. They mentioned that one adopted child had been so violent that Tanya could not live with him. They discussed how the family had been split apart for years, with some members living in Mooresville and others in Deep Gap. A teacher named Susan Shaw wrote a letter about conversations she had with Tristan about his strict religious upbringing and him feeling confined by his family's choices and values. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On March 2nd, 2022, at approximately 3:55 in the afternoon, the jury returned their verdicts. They found Tristan Borlase guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his mother, Tanya Borlase. They found him guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his father, Jeffrey Borlase. The next day, on March 3rd, 2022, the court held a sentencing hearing. Because Tristan was a minor when he committed the murders, there were special rules for his sentencing. The United States Supreme Court has said that procedures must be developed that take mitigating circumstances into account before deciding whether to give life in prison without parole to a juvenile. North Carolina law requires judges to consider specific factors before sentencing a child to life without parole. These factors include the person's age at the time of the offence, their immaturity, their ability to understand risks and consequences, their intellectual capacity, their prior record, their mental health, any family or peer pressure, whether they would benefit from rehabilitation, and any other mitigating factors. During the sentencing hearing, members of the Borlase family gave victim impact statements. Taylor Borlase, the oldest sibling, talked about how she became the head of the family at 22 years old. She said she had to stop going to school to become guardian and caretaker of her younger brothers. Another sister, Alexis Hinchcliffe, spoke about how their parents would never get to be grandparents. She said her parents had already chosen their grandparent names. They would have been called May May and Papa Jeff. She said she hoped to be the mother her mum was and to live in a way that honours her parents. She said Tristan Borlase needed to spend his life behind bars for as long as he lives so that the family could move forward. District Attorney Seth Banks read a statement from Robin Hahn, Tanya Borlase's mother. In her statement, Hahn wrote that as soon as her daughter Tanya and her son-in-law Jeff took their last breaths, they met at the holy light, grabbed each other's hands, and ran straight through the pearly gates. She wrote that God wrapped his arms around them and told them to rest. Hahn also talked about the family dog named Muggsy. Muggsy had attacked Tristan when Tristan attacked Jeffrey. After the murders, Muggsy came to live with Robin Hahn, along with 2 other dogs and a rabbit. She said Muggsy went crazy and would attack the other dogs. She had to have Muggsy put down. The vet said this was not uncommon with extreme trauma. Hahn wrote that losing the dog that tried to save her children was horrible. The defense presented letters and reports to the court. They gave the judge a report from a psychologist named Dr. Hilke, who had evaluated Tristan. They provided letters from teachers and church leaders. They argued that Tristan's age, his immaturity, his difficult family situation, and his mental health problems should be considered as mitigating factors. Defense attorney Garland Baker asked the court to consolidate the sentences into one continuous life sentence with the possibility of parole, rather than two consecutive sentences. The prosecution argued that the weight of the evidence and the gravity of the loss would overcome any mitigating factors. They asked for two consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge who sentenced Tristan was Superior Court Judge R. Gregory Horne. Judge Horne said he considered the mitigating factors the defense presented, but found most of them not credible. He said there was no evidence that age, ability to appreciate risk and consequences, or intellectual capacity would be mitigating factors in Tristan Borlase' sentencing. Judge Horne mentioned Tristan's devious calculations made during the crimes. He noted Tristan's lack of sincere remorse for the crimes. He pointed to Tristan's manipulative behaviours during and after the crimes. On March 3, 2022, Judge Greg Horne sentenced Tristan Noah Borlase to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each count of first-degree murder. The sentences would run consecutively. This meant Tristan would serve 2 life sentences back-to-back with no chance of ever being released from prison. The court also granted a permanent no-contact order against Tristan Borlase. This meant he would not be able to contact his 2 younger brothers. Tristan was sent to Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. According to prison records, he has had 1 infraction for disobeying an order. He was later moved to Lumberton Correctional Institution. Tristan's lawyer said her client planned to appeal the sentence. The appeal argued that the sentencing process was not done correctly under North Carolina law because Tristan was a minor when the crime happened. The lawyer argued that Judge Horne violated Tristan's right against cruel and unusual punishment. She said the judge was wrong to determine that Tristan's crimes showed irreparable corruption and permanent incorrigibility. On January 2, 2024, the North Carolina Court of Appeals issued a 2-1 decision. The majority opinion was written by Judge Chris Dillon. Judge Fred Gore joined in the majority opinion. They affirmed Tristan's 2 life sentences without parole. The majority wrote that Judge Horne exercised discretion to determine an appropriate punishment, and his decision was not arbitrary. They concluded that the trial court complied with North Carolina law in sentencing Tristan. They said Tristan received a fair trial, free from reversible error. Judge John Arrowood wrote the dissenting opinion. He said he would have ordered a new sentencing hearing. He argued that Judge Horne refused to consider relevant evidence of family pressures, Tristan's immaturity, and his age. Judge Arrowood noted Tristan's highly dysfunctional relationship with his mother. He wrote about how Tanya would wake Tristan up in the night and lecture him for hours. He mentioned the religious conflicts and the poor living conditions. He discussed Tristan's depression and anxiety and his suicide attempt. Judge Arrowood wrote that the trial court did not adequately consider the evidence about Tristan's immaturity and family life. Tristan's new lawyer, Lisa Miles from the Office of the Appellate Defender, said they would appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court. The case went to the North Carolina Supreme Court. In September 2024, the Supreme Court heard arguments. On March 25, 2025, the North Carolina Supreme Court issued its ruling. The court upheld Tristan Noah Borlase's 2 life sentences without parole. The majority opinion affirmed the Court of Appeals ruling that there was no error in the sentences. The court determined that North Carolina's statutory framework satisfied constitutional requirements by requiring consideration of youth-specific mitigating factors while preserving judicial discretion in sentencing. The opinion said that while previous Supreme Court cases require individualized sentencing for juveniles, judges are not required to make explicit findings that a juvenile is permanently incorrigible. 2 justices wrote a dissenting opinion. Justices Anita Earls and Alison Riggs argued that the appeals court was being too hands-off and not properly reviewing how the trial court handled the case. The dissent said the trial court failed to consider evidence of familial pressure as required by law. They pointed to scientific research showing how difficult home environments can impact teenage brain development and decision-making. The dissenting justices said that, despite the terrible nature of the crimes, Tristan's constitutional and statutory rights to proper consideration of mitigating factors were violated. They would have reversed the sentence and ordered a new sentencing hearing. The final ruling meant that Tristan Noah Borlase would spend the rest of his life in prison. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing his parents when he was 1 month away from turning 18 years old. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The North Carolina Supreme Court upheld this sentence. Tristan is currently serving his sentence in the North Carolina prison system. He is now 23 years old and will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. Tyler James Hadley was 17 years old when he murdered his parents on July 16, 2011. He lived with his mother Mary Jo Hadley and his father Blake Hadley in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Mary Jo was 47 years old and Blake was 54 years old. The family lived in a house on Northeast Grandeur Avenue in Port St. Lucie. Tyler was born on December 16, 1993. He was born prematurely and had to stay in the hospital for a month inside an incubator. As he grew older, he was on various medications for depression, hormones, and thyroid problems, among other conditions. Tyler had an older brother named Ryan, who was 23 years old at the time of the murders. Ryan had graduated from college and planned to return to Port St. Lucie to work alongside his father at the power plant. The Hadley family seemed normal to people who knew them. Blake worked at a power plant. Mary Jo was described by Blake's mother as someone who once sold her wedding ring and replaced it with an inexpensive band to help build houses for the homeless in Haiti when a hurricane hit. People in the community thought of Blake and Mary Jo as good parents who cared about their children. By the time Tyler was 15 years old, his family noticed a change in him. He started skipping school and hanging out with what his family called the wrong crowd. He got involved with drugs. His aunt Cindy Hadley said they knew he was using marijuana. Tyler also began using alcohol, Xanax, Percocet, oxycodone, ecstasy, and a hallucinogen called DMT. Relatives described Tyler as loving but withdrawn. He kept to himself and suffered from anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and bulimia. He often quit sports, hobbies, and projects soon after starting them. He would say he was not good enough and felt like he was a step below everyone else. He tried to learn drums and trombone, but quit both. Tyler's behavior problems got worse as he got older. Court documents show he had been involved in many crimes before the murders. He participated in drug use, drug sales, and drug purchases. He was arrested for arson, vandalism, thefts, and aggravated battery. In June 2010, Tyler hit and injured a child while driving his father's car. There was a $15,000 civil lawsuit pending because of this accident. 2 weeks before the murders, Tyler set fire to the River Park Wildlife Preserve. He and several other boys dragged an abandoned couch into a clearing, poured gasoline on it that they had stolen from the local Sunoco gas station, and dropped a match. The fire department had to be called, but the kids got off with a warning. In late April 2011, about 10 weeks before the party, Tyler got into a fight at a friend's house and was arrested on a charge of aggravated battery. Blake and Mary Jo were desperate to help their son. They tried everything they could think of. They took Tyler to a psychiatrist. They put him on antidepressant medications. They enrolled him in an outpatient mental health and substance abuse program. Nothing seemed to work. Tyler continued to use drugs and get into trouble. In June 2011, 1 month before the murders, Tyler came home extremely drunk one night. He had urinated on his friend's bed. Mary Jo used the Baker Act to admit Tyler to New Horizons, a mental health clinic. The Baker Act is a Florida law that allows parents to commit their children to involuntary psychiatric treatment if they are under the age of 18. Tyler was forced to attend counselling every day. After this incident, Blake and Mary Jo took away Tyler's phone and car as punishment. Tyler was angry about this. He told his best friend Michael Mandel that he wanted to kill his mother. Mandel thought Tyler was just mad about getting punished. He did not think Tyler would actually do it. Tyler had made comments about killing his parents to other friends too. In a Facebook chat with his friend Mercedes Marco on July 2, 2011, 2 weeks before the murders, Tyler complained that his mother had taken his cell phone. He wrote that she was a bad word and said he might kill her. Mercedes told him not to go to jail or prison. Tyler wrote back that it would be okay. On the morning of July 16, 2011, at 9:40 in the morning, Tyler had a Facebook chat with his friend Matthew Nobile. Matthew asked Tyler if he had done it. Tyler said no, but he was going to do it. Matthew responded with encouragement and told Tyler he really should do it now. Tyler said not to worry because he was going to do it, and then he was having a party. Matthew wrote back saying it was party time. Blake and Mary Jo were very worried about Tyler. They knew he would turn 18 soon. They had recently found an inpatient treatment program for him. This was later reported to be the main reason Tyler killed his parents. He did not want to go to the inpatient treatment program. A week before the murders, Blake and Mary Jo took Tyler on a family reunion trip to a cabin in Georgia. Tyler's aunt, Cindy Hadley, said she never saw Tyler lose his temper during this trip. She said that was what made everything so bizarre. The trip seemed normal. On the morning of Saturday, July 16, 2011, at 11:25, Tyler received a Facebook message from his friend, Antonio Ramirez. Antonio asked what Tyler was doing that night. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Tyler posted on his Facebook wall. He wrote that there would be a party at his house tonight. Maybe. Tyler's parents were home. His friends knew that Blake and Mary Jo had been getting stricter with Tyler lately. They did not think his parents would let him have a party. When friends asked Tyler if the party was really happening, he wrote back that he did not know and he was working on it. His friends thought this meant the party was not going to happen. Tyler had never thrown a party before. After Tyler's parents came home that afternoon, Tyler hid their cell phones. He took both phones and hid them in his bedroom. This way, if his plan went wrong, his parents would not be able to call for help. Tyler also locked the family's black Labrador dog in a closet. He suspected the dog would try to defend his parents. Shortly before 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Tyler took 3 pills of ecstasy. He later told investigators he was worried he could not kill his parents while he was sober. He went to the garage and found a claw hammer. The hammer was a framing hammer. It was 17 inches long with a wooden handle and weighed 22 ounces. Tyler went back into the house with the hammer. He listened to a song called Feel Lucky by the rapper Lil Boozy to psych himself up. Mary Jo was working on the family computer in the family room. Tyler stood behind his mother. He stood there for 5 full minutes thinking about what he was about to do. Then he raised the claw end of the hammer and brought it down on Mary Jo's head. Tyler struck his mother repeatedly. The medical examiner who later examined Mary Jo's body was named Linda O'Neill. She testified that Mary Jo was hit 36 times. Most of the blows were to her head and back. Linda O'Neill said that Mary Jo was alive during every single blow. Blake Hadley heard his wife screaming. He ran out of the master bedroom to see what was happening. Blake was a big man. He was 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 300 pounds. Father and son locked eyes for several moments. Blake asked why Tyler was doing this. Tyler shouted back, asking why the hell not. Then Tyler attacked his father with the hammer. Tyler struck Blake head on. He hit his father at least 39 times in the head and chest. Blake Hadley died from the injuries. After killing both his parents, Tyler spent the next 3 hours cleaning up the crime scene. He dragged both bodies into the master bedroom. He used books, files, towels, and anything else he could find inside the home to cover the bodies. He piled dining chairs and a coffee table on top of the bed. He threw household items and furniture on top of his parents' bodies. Tyler tried to clean up all the blood. He used Clorox wipes and towels. He threw these bloody cleaning materials onto the bed with the bodies. Tyler later told people what happened during this time. He said he looked in the mirror after the murders and saw how bloody he was. Then he laughed. He also told investigators he had planned to kill himself by carbon monoxide poisoning after murdering his parents, but he did not go through with it. Around sunset, Tyler was done cleaning. He used his parents' credit cards to fund the party. He went to an ATM machine to get cash. The ATM took Tyler's photo when he withdrew money from his parents' accounts. He was spotted pulling out about $5,000 in cash. Then Tyler went to pick up some friends. He bought alcohol and marijuana for the party. At 8:15 in the evening, Tyler posted on Facebook again. This time he wrote that the party at his house was definitely on. He told people to hit him up. When one friend asked what would happen if his parents came home, Tyler responded that they would not come home. He told them to trust him. Tyler told his friend Michael Mandel that his parents were away in Orlando, Florida. People started arriving at the Hadley house for the party. Between 40 and 60 teenagers showed up. Most of the people at the party did not even know Tyler. Word had spread on social media that there was a party happening and the parents were out of town. Young people were drinking and sitting around talking. Beer bottles ended up all over the house. Unrolled cigars littered the floor. The furniture got tossed around. Several people at the party later said they noticed a strange smell. They described it as the smell of dead bodies. Some people noticed blood. There was dried blood on the walls. There was blood by the computer desk where Mary Jo had been sitting. There was blood by the master bedroom door. But most partygoers did not realise what had happened. During the party, Tyler told several people about what he had done. Nobody took him seriously at first. Tyler's friends knew he sometimes said crazy things. At one point during the party, Tyler pulled his best friend Michael Mandel aside. He told Michael he needed to tell him something. The two went outside to talk. Tyler said that he had killed his parents. Michael did not believe him. He told Tyler to shut up and asked what he was talking about. Tyler insisted it was true. He told Michael to look at the driveway. All the cars were there. His parents were not in Orlando. He said he had killed his parents. Michael Mandel went back inside the house. He saw blood by the computer desk. He saw more blood by the master bedroom door, but he still thought Tyler was playing an elaborate prank on him. Michael took Tyler into the garage and said he wanted to see the bodies if Tyler really did it. He said he did not believe Tyler. Tyler told Michael the party needed to die down before he could show him proof. Michael refused to wait. He went to check for himself. Michael opened the master bedroom door. He saw furniture piled on the bed. Then he looked down and saw his friend's father's leg against the door. At that moment, Michael realised Tyler was telling the truth. Blake and Mary Jo Hadley were really dead in the bedroom. Michael Mandel was in shock. He stayed at the party for several more hours. Before he left, Michael and Tyler took a selfie together. Michael later explained that he took the photo because he knew it would be the last time he would ever see his friend. In the photo, neither of them is smiling. It is a very sad picture. Michael Mandel left the party at 4:24 in the morning on July 17, 2011. He went home and called Crime Stoppers. He left an anonymous tip saying that Tyler Hadley had murdered both his parents using a hammer. Police rushed to the Hadley house. When they arrived, the party was still going on. Officers knocked on the door. Tyler answered and told them his parents were out of town. He refused to let police into the house. But the police made an emergency entrance despite Tyler's protests. According to the arrest affidavit, Tyler appeared nervous, frantic, and very talkative while speaking to the officers. The police found beer bottles everywhere. They saw unrolled cigars on the floor and furniture that had been tossed around. They found dried blood on the walls. The officers forced open the master bedroom door. They found dining chairs and a coffee table piled on the bed. Under all the furniture, they discovered the body of Blake Hadley. They found Mary Jo Hadley's body nearby, also buried under items Tyler had thrown on top of her. Both had been beaten to death with the hammer. Tyler Hadley was arrested early on the morning of July 17, 2011. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Police said Tyler had dropped out of Port St. Lucie High School and had been taking classes at Indian River State College instead. The news of what Tyler had done shocked the Port St. Lucie community. A neighbour told reporters she heard screams coming from the Hadley home on the night of July 16th. Many people struggled to understand how this could have happened. Tyler's uncle, Mike Hadley, said the murders tore the family apart. Mike Hadley's wife, Cindy, and his sister, Linda Ankrum, were devastated. Mike Hadley said his mother had a stroke a year after the murders and later passed away. Tyler's older brother, Ryan Hadley, was also devastated. He had planned to work with his father at the power plant after graduating from college. At the funeral service for Blake and Mary Jo, someone approached Ryan and asked if he was going to visit Tyler in jail. Ryan said he was going to see his brother that night. It would be the first time the brothers had seen each other since the murders. Ryan said it was what his parents would want him to do. They would not want him to abandon Tyler. Ryan said he did not know what he was going to say to his brother. He thought he would probably just sit there and cry. Tyler was held in jail while he waited for his case to go to trial. While in jail, Tyler's behaviour shocked people. A fellow inmate told police that Tyler had been signing autographs for other inmates. Tyler would take a news article about the murders and write the words, "It's hammer time," across the article. He signed these with a self-proclaimed nickname he gave himself. He called himself Hammer Boy. The inmate also said Tyler told him he had talked with the devil. Tyler told investigators he was in some sort of psychotic state or trance when he killed his parents. He said he wished he would have known his parents more as people, instead of just as mum and dad. Tyler said he never really saw them as real people. He told a psychologist named Robert Kinshirf that he was probably mad about getting in trouble and everything that was going on. Originally, Tyler pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but on February 19, 2014, Tyler changed his plea. He pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder with a weapon. Tyler's attorney, Diamond Litty, said Tyler was taking responsibility for his actions. She said there was another side to the story that the public would hear during mitigation. The prosecution argued that Tyler killed his parents because he was upset they had disciplined him. They said Blake and Mary Jo had been trying to get Tyler to go to a drug treatment center. Prosecutors said the murders were premeditated. They pointed out that Tyler had told friends weeks before that he was planning to do this. Tyler had even said that having a big party after killing your parents had never been done before. The prosecution said Tyler took both his parents' cell phones so they could not call for help. This showed he had planned everything carefully. Because Tyler changed his plea to no contest, the case did not go to trial. Instead, there was a sentencing hearing. The hearing lasted 2 weeks. Tyler was 17 years and 5 months old when he killed his parents. Because he was under 18 at the time of the crime, he was considered a juvenile under the law. This meant special rules applied to his sentencing. On March 21, 2014, Judge Robert R. Makomson sentenced Tyler Hadley. The judge gave Tyler 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge said the crimes were brutal, heinous, and premeditated. Judge Makomson called the attacks on Tyler's parents very painful, both physically and emotionally. He said the attacks were emotional because Blake and Mary Jo realized their own son was killing them. The judge read aloud his sentencing order. It listed in gruesome detail how Tyler had plotted for months before the murders. The judge noted that Tyler had told friends he would wait until after his brother Ryan moved to North Carolina before killing his parents. And Tyler did wait. The judge seemed angry that after the murders Tyler hid the bodies, tried to clean up the blood, and sent word out that the party was on. The judge rejected all defense arguments that Tyler's age, immaturity, or troubled youth should reduce his sentence. The defense had presented evidence about Tyler's anxiety, depression, and drug use. They argued these factors influenced his decision to kill, but Judge Makomson did not agree. He also accused Tyler of manipulating experts and lying about hearing voices. Tyler's attorney had asked for 2 30-year sentences to be served at the same time, with a review after 20 years. But the prosecution asked for 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. The judge sided with the prosecution. This meant Tyler would serve 2 life sentences back to back, with no chance of ever being released. The judge said that because Tyler was under 18 at the time of the murders, the state could not seek the death penalty. The prosecutor even said it was unfortunate they were prohibited from seeking the death penalty, just because Tyler was about 6 months short of his 18th birthday. Tyler's case was one of the first juvenile killer cases to be sentenced in that area, after the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling in 2012. The case was called Miller v. Alabama. This ruling said that mandatory life without parole for people under the age of 18 at the time of their crimes violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Tyler was sent to prison. According to prison records, he was first held at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was later moved to Okeechobee Correctional Institution. While in prison, Tyler got into more trouble. In April 2016, a prison guard found Tyler with a homemade weapon in the shower area. The guard wrote in his report that he discovered a weapon made from a piece of metal about 6 inches long. It was sharpened to a point with a piece of cloth wrapped around one end to be used as a handle. Tyler was punished with 60 days in disciplinary confinement. This meant he lived in a solitary cell with limited privileges. In April 2016, Tyler's sentencing was overturned by an appeals court judge. The judge said the lower court did not consider the correct alternative to a life sentence. When Tyler was originally sentenced in 2014, Florida had just changed its laws about how juvenile murderers should be treated. The new law said that a juvenile defendant who commits murder can be punished by either a life sentence or by a term of at least 40 years. When Judge Makomson sentenced Tyler, these new rules were not fully in place. The appeals court said Tyler was entitled to a new sentencing hearing under the new law. Tyler's resentencing hearing took place in October 2018. The hearing lasted 6 days. Tyler was now 24 years old. He had spent years in state prison. The hearing was in front of a new judge named Gary Sweet. Tyler's attorney asked the judge to sentence Tyler to 40 years, with the possibility of parole review after 25 years. The defense called witnesses including child behavior experts and psychologists who specialized in adolescent drug use and brain development. A psychologist named Robert Kinscherf testified that Tyler showed the ability to be rehabilitated over time. Kinscherf said rehabilitation could potentially lead to release from prison, though he admitted it was hard to predict Tyler's future. The prosecution argued that the Supreme Court ruling did not say a minor could not be sentenced to life. They said life in prison was the appropriate sentence for Tyler Hadley. The medical examiner testified again about the brutal attack. She described the 36 blows Tyler delivered to his mother and the 39 blows he delivered to his father. The prosecution displayed the murder weapon in court. Blake's brother Mike took the stand and read a victim impact statement. He said the murders tore the family apart. Several of Tyler's family members attended the hearing. They sided with the judge and prosecutors. They wanted Tyler to be imprisoned for life. Mike Hadley said it felt like going through another funeral. He said he was tired of these funerals, and this was like the third funeral in the case. On December 20th, 2018, Judge Gary Sweet announced his ruling. He resentenced Tyler Hadley to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But this time, the sentence included an automatic judicial review mechanism. The review would happen after 25 years, starting from the time Tyler was first arrested in 2011. This meant that in 2036, a judge would determine if the life terms were still appropriate based on Tyler's conduct and behavior in prison. The judge could decide then whether Tyler's sentence should be reduced. Judge Sweet said that at this point, whether or not Tyler would receive effective treatment and could be rehabilitated was anyone's guess. He said the appropriate sentence for Tyler was life for the murders of his parents. The judge called the crime heinous, atrocious, cruel, and a product of premeditation. Chief Assistant State Attorney Tom Bakadal said if Tyler Hadley did not deserve life in prison, then no one did. He called the judge's order bulletproof. He said there had to be finality, and the family could not tolerate another resentencing. It was simply unfair to the victims. Mike Hadley said he could finally exhale. He felt relieved with the judge's decision. He said it was the correct ruling and the only one the judge could make based on all the evidence. He hoped the family could now celebrate Blake and Mary Jo's lives, try to think of good and happy times, and move on. Tyler Hadley has 30 days to appeal the resentencing. He is currently serving his sentence at Liberty Correctional Institution in Florida. The Hadley house where the murders took place was demolished in April 2015. The community wanted to move past this tragic chapter. Tyler Hadley was 17 years old when he killed his parents Blake and Mary Jo Hadley on July 16, 2011, in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He pleaded no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence was overturned on appeal in 2016, and he was resentenced in December 2018 to life in prison. Tyler is now entitled to a judicial review after 25 years from his arrest. He will remain in prison serving 2 consecutive life sentences for murdering his parents and then throwing a party while their bodies lay hidden in their bedroom. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3. Sarah Marie Johnson was 16 years old when she murdered her parents on September 2, 2003. She lived with her mother Diane Johnson and her father Alan Scott Johnson in Bellevue, Idaho. Bellevue is a small city on the outskirts of Sun Valley, Idaho. Diane was 47 years old. Some sources say she was 52. And Alan was 46 years old. Some sources say he was 54. The family lived in a beautiful home on a spacious 2-acre property at 1193 Glen Aspen Drive. Sarah was born on January 24, 1987. She grew up in Bellevue and attended Wood River High School in nearby Haley. The Johnson family seemed to have a picture-perfect life. Alan and Diane had been together for 20 years. They were longtime sweethearts who treasured their family. Alan was part owner of a landscaping company. Diane worked as a tax collector at a medical clinic. The couple had 2 children. Their older child was a son named Matthew Johnson, who went by Matt. Matt was 22 years old in 2003. Their younger child was Sarah, who was 16. In 2003, Sarah began dating a 19-year-old named Bruno Santos. Bruno Santos was a high school dropout. He was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. Bruno was suspected of gang membership and drug activity. He had a cocky personality and had been involved in controlled substance charges. Sarah's parents found Bruno none too endearing. Alan and Diane strongly disapproved of the relationship. Sarah had been dating Bruno for about 3 months by the time of the murders. The couple had engaged in sexual intercourse and had exchanged promise rings. Sarah told several people that she and Bruno were engaged to be married. However, when investigators asked her about this later, she said they were not engaged. The age difference between Sarah and Bruno created legal problems. Sarah was 16 and Bruno was 19. This meant Bruno could be charged with statutory rape for having a sexual relationship with Sarah. Sarah tried the usual teenage tricks to keep seeing Bruno despite her parents' wishes. She would tell her mum and dad she was sleeping over at a girlfriend's house when she was really with Bruno. When Alan and Diane found out about one such incident, they were very upset. They took away Sarah's car as punishment. They threatened to file charges against Bruno for statutory rape. They also threatened to have Bruno arrested and deported since he was in the United States illegally. Alan confronted Bruno 3 days before the murders. He warned Bruno about statutory rape charges and demanded he stop all contact with Sarah. Sarah's relationship with her parents became very strained. Her older brother Matt later testified that Sarah was overdramatic and tended to stretch the truth when it suited her. A neighbour named Dorothy testified about events in the summer of 2003. She said she heard Diane weeping on the back patio one day. Diane was saying that everything was always her fault. Everything that went wrong was always her fault. Dorothy then heard Sarah screaming inside the house. She heard Alan telling Sarah to go out and apologise to her mother. The Johnsons owned a guest house on their property. They rented this structure to a man named Mel Spiegel. Mel Spiegel was an electrician. He owned a Winchester Model 70 bolt-action rifle. The rifle was a .264 caliber Magnum hunting rifle. A neighbour named Linda testified that she had seen Sarah spend time in the guest house. Sarah said she was studying when she went there. School had started only 4 days before the murders. Linda testified that when she saw Sarah go to the guest house, Sarah was not carrying books or a backpack. On the day before the murders, September 1st, 2003, something important happened. Diane's sister testified that Sarah had asked her for the keys to the gun safe. This was 1 day before Sarah killed her parents. In the early morning hours of September 2nd, 2003, just after 6 o'clock, Sarah Marie Johnson went to the guest house. Mel Spiegel had left for Boise, Idaho. He had not planned on returning for a week or so. Sarah took Mel Spiegel's hunting rifle from the guest house. She brought the rifle back to the main house. According to what prosecutors presented at trial, Sarah prepared herself carefully for what she was about to do. She pulled a shower cap over her blonde hair. She put a pink plush bathrobe on backward over her pajamas. She wore a leather glove on her left hand and a latex glove on her right hand. The prosecution said Sarah was a fan of true crime entertainment and may have learned about avoiding forensic evidence from these shows. At approximately 6:20 in the morning, Sarah entered her parents' bedroom. Her mother Diane was still sleeping in bed. Her father Alan was in the shower in the master bathroom attached to the bedroom. Sarah placed the end of the rifle on her mother's head and pulled the trigger. She shot Diane through the blankets while Diane was still sleeping. The shot killed Diane instantly. The gunshot was fired at very close range. High-velocity blood spatter from Diane's head wounds splattered onto the wall. Some of this blood spatter and bone fragments ended up in Sarah's bedroom, which was directly across the hall from her parents' bedroom. This showed how close the shooter was when the gun was fired. Alan Scott Johnson heard the gunshot from the shower. He emerged from the shower to see what had happened. Sarah then shot her father. She shot him in the chest at a distance of about 3 feet. The bullet went right above Alan's heart. Alan fell to the floor. He then stood up and walked toward the side of the bed where his wife usually slept. He felt for Diane and then collapsed. Alan died from his injuries. Blood from Alan's wounds splattered across the bedroom carpet, the ceiling, and the walls. There was also blood in the bathroom where he had first been shot. A partial piece of skullcap was found in the hallway. It was a very gruesome and bloody scene. After killing both her parents, Sarah took steps to try to cover up what she had done. She placed 2 butcher knives on the floor at the foot of her parents' bed. She placed a 3rd knife on the bed in her brother's room. Matt was away at the University of Idaho in Moscow at the time. Sarah later told a cellmate that she placed the knives to throw off police. She apparently wanted to make it look like gang activity had occurred. She put the rifle's scope on Mel Spiegel's bed in the guest house and left the rest of the rifle at the crime scene. Sarah took off the shower cap, bathrobe and gloves. She threw these items in the garbage can outside the house. She also threw away about 5 unspent .264 caliber rounds that were in the garbage can. She flushed the shower cap down the toilet. She changed into regular clothes. The t-shirt Sarah had been wearing under the bathrobe had dried green paint on the front. This would later become important evidence. Around 6:20 in the morning, neighbours heard gunshots. Some neighbours also heard screams. One neighbour woke up to her dog growling and staring out the window. Then she heard a scream. Sarah ran out of the house and down the street. She was screaming. She ran to the home of her neighbours, the Richards family. Kim Richards lived nearby. Her daughter Rachel Richards was Sarah's friend. Kim Richards' husband Timothy Richards was Sarah's volleyball coach. Rachel Richards woke her parents at about 6:20 to alert them that a girl was outside screaming. When Kim Richards opened her front door, Sarah was there screaming that someone had shot her parents. She said someone had shot her dad. She said someone had shot her parents. Sarah told Kim Richards that she was at home at the time of the shooting but had not witnessed it. Timothy Richards quickly left his house, thinking someone needed his help. He and 2 neighbours entered the Johnson home. One of the first things they noticed was a sour smell. These first 3 men became the first in a series of more than 10 people who walked through the crime scene before any evidence was collected. Timothy Richards later testified about what he saw. He said he saw pieces of hair and head and blood and things like that. He saw a crucifix leaning on the rifle on the bedroom floor. He said that in the bed there was a lump of somebody covered by blankets. The covers were pulled all the way over. He assumed that whoever was under the covers probably did not need help. There was not a top part visible under the covers. In the bathroom attached to the master bedroom, the shower was still running. The only light in the otherwise dark pre-dawn home came from the bathroom and a hallway light one of the men turned on. Someone called 911. Police from Bellevue arrived at the scene. Bellevue was a small town that had not seen a murder in over 10 years. When officers arrived, they confirmed that both of Alan and Diane Johnson were dead from gunshot wounds. Police found the powerful bolt-action hunting rifle at the scene. This was the murder weapon. Bellevue Marshal Randy Tremble arrived and began questioning Sarah. He later testified that Sarah's answers were not straightforward. He said she was offering information that was not relevant to the questions he had just asked. To prosecutors, Sarah's responses seemed like she was trying to deceive them. To defense attorneys, Sarah seemed disoriented. The Blaine County Sheriff, Walt Femling, arrived to investigate. When he entered the master bedroom, he stopped and looked to his left. He could see Sarah's bedroom across the hall. He saw that there was blood spatter into Sarah's bedroom as well. He said it was literally a rainstorm of blood inside the bedroom. Blood was on the ceilings, on the walls, and all over the carpet. It was a very gruesome scene. Sheriff Femling noticed that the garbage truck was making its way through the neighbourhood. He immediately stopped the garbage truck from picking up trash. This turned out to be a critical decision. Police searched the garbage can outside the Johnson home. Inside the can, they found a pink bathrobe. They found a left-handed brown leather glove. They found a right-handed latex glove. They also found unspent ammunition rounds. When investigators examined these items more carefully, they made important discoveries. The pink bathrobe had high-velocity blood splatter from both Diane and Alan Johnson. The robe also had dried paint residue on the inside of it. The robe had gunshot residue on it as well. The gloves had traces of gunpowder residue on the outside. Most importantly, Sarah's DNA was found inside the latex glove. Sarah's DNA was also found on the bathrobe, along with her mother's DNA. Plumbers were called to examine the plumbing in the Johnson home. They recovered a shower cap that Sarah had flushed down the toilet. Police also found evidence in Sarah's bedroom. 2 unused .264 caliber bullets were found in Sarah's room on a nightstand. A spent .264 caliber shell casing was found in the garage. Police compared the t-shirt Sarah had been wearing on the morning of the murders to the bathrobe. The t-shirt had dried green paint on the front only. Flecks of matching green paint were found on the inside back portion of the bathrobe. This proved that Sarah had worn the bathrobe backward over her t-shirt. Police also found Sarah's socks. The socks were spattered with Diane's blood. This was significant because Sarah claimed she did not go near the bodies. The physical evidence showed otherwise. Investigators went to the guest house. They found the scope to the hunting rifle on Mel Spiegel's bed. They needed to question Mel Spiegel, but he was not home. He was in Boise and not expected back for a week. When investigators finally reached Mel Spiegel, they learned he had nothing to do with the murders. His fingerprints were found on the rifle because it was his rifle. He had handled it many times before. At first, investigators suspected Bruno Santos might be involved. Bruno was 19 years old and had a relationship with Sarah that her parents disapproved of. He seemed like an obvious suspect. Bruno had been at home on the evening of September 1st, 2003. Around 9 in the morning on September 2nd, after the murders, Bruno drove to the Johnson home to ask about the crimes. A friend had called him on the phone to tell him what happened. However, investigators could not find any physical evidence connecting Bruno to the crime scene. There was no DNA from Bruno at the scene. There were no fingerprints from Bruno. Police eventually cleared Bruno Santos as a suspect. As investigators continued to focus on Sarah, her behaviour raised more concerns. Sheriff Femling remembered that he knew Sarah personally. He admitted this clouded his view at first. He said he never believed a teenage girl could commit a crime like this. But the evidence kept pointing to Sarah. As investigators removed Alan and Diane's bodies from the house, Sheriff Femling noticed something troubling. He saw a coldness and distance from Sarah. He told his team to take note of this. He said most 16-year-olds would be hiding or crying uncontrollably. Sarah seemed unusually calm. Family and friends who arrived at the house also noticed something wrong with Sarah's behaviour. She did not seem appropriately upset about her parents' deaths. Sarah was arrested in late October 2003. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. At first, family members hoped Sarah would confess. Sarah's grandmother, Diane's mother Pat Dishman, said family members kept hoping Sarah would admit what she had done, but Sarah never confessed. While Sarah was held in the Blaine County Jail awaiting trial, she earned a nickname from her Hispanic cellmates. They called her Pequeña Asesina, which means little killer in Spanish. According to prosecutors, Sarah laughed when she heard this nickname. She thought it was funny. One of Sarah's cellmates was a convicted drug trafficker named Melinda Gonzalez. Melinda later testified about conversations she had with Sarah in jail. During these conversations, Sarah revealed details that prosecutors used against her at trial. Sarah's trial began in February 2005 in the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. The trial moved to Boise because it had received so much publicity in Blaine County. The trial lasted 5 or 6 weeks. It was predicted to last 6 to 8 weeks total. Court TV broadcast the proceedings live. The case became a national sensation. About 50 people nearly filled the courtroom to capacity during opening arguments. The prosecutor was Blaine County Prosecuting Attorney Jim Thomas. He gave opening statements on February 7, 2005. Thomas told the jury that the vast trail of evidence collected during the investigation clearly pointed to only one person. He said the case was about evidence left behind by Sarah Marie Johnson. Thomas pointed to specific evidence including a magazine of bullets found in Sarah's bedroom. He pointed to the pink bathrobe, the leather glove, and the latex glove found in the trash can. He said Sarah's DNA was found inside the latex glove and on the bathrobe. He said Diane's DNA was also found on the bathrobe. Thomas told the jury about the 2 butcher knives that were found wiped completely clean of fingerprints. The knives had been strategically placed at the end of the master bed near the bodies. Thomas asked the jury what the 2 knives meant. He said investigators later learned from one of Sarah's cellmates that Sarah had placed the knives to throw off police. The defense team included attorneys Mark Rader and Robert Pangburn. They reserved the right to make their opening remarks later. However, at the conclusion of Thomas's opening statement, Mark Rader made a motion to dismiss the charges. He said the prosecution's opening slideshow, which ended with a photograph of Sarah Johnson with a guilty label over it, was totally inappropriate. He said he was stunned when he saw this. He argued the jury had been sullied and the trial should not go on. But Judge Barry Wood simply said he disagreed. The prosecution presented many witnesses during the trial. Nearly a dozen neighbours testified about what they heard or saw on the morning of the murders. The Richards family testified about Sarah running to their house screaming. Multiple neighbours testified about whether they heard any voices, noises, cars, or dogs barking between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. This was important because Sarah had told investigators that her whole family had been woken up at that time after they heard voices in the backyard. Sarah said Diane said one of the voices sounded like the family's cleaning lady, but none of the neighbours heard anything unusual at that time. This suggested Sarah had made up this story. The prosecution presented the physical evidence. They showed the bloody bathrobe. They showed the gloves with gunpowder residue. They explained how Sarah's DNA was found inside the gloves. They showed the matching paint transfer from Sarah's t-shirt to the inside of the bathrobe. They presented testimony about the blood spatter evidence. They showed how blood from the shooting had splattered into Sarah's bedroom, proving the shooter was standing very close to the victims. A medical examiner testified about the wounds suffered by both victims. Diane had been shot in the head at close range. Alan had been shot in the chest. Both had died from their gunshot wounds. Crime scene investigator Rod Englert later said during a Forensic Files interview that the evidence was yelling and screaming. The evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Sarah as the killer. Bruno Santos testified at the trial. He testified for the prosecution to prove he had nothing to do with the murders. He wanted to clear his name. Sarah's brother Matt also testified. Matt said his sister was overdramatic and tended to stretch the truth when it suited her, but he loved her just the same. The defense attorney pointed out that Matt would receive Sarah's portion of their parents' insurance money if the jury convicted her. The prosecution argued there was about $680,000 in life insurance money that could have been a motive for Sarah. Sarah Johnson cried twice on the first day of the trial. She cried once when the prosecutor was describing the bedroom scene. She cried again when they played the 911 call made by the neighbour. The jury was taken to view the crime scene. They walked through the house in two different groups. The attorneys and the judge were there, but sat outside while the jurors walked through and could see the scene for themselves. The defence tried to argue that someone else had killed Alan and Diane Johnson. They pointed out that there were fingerprints on the murder weapon that did not belong to Sarah. These fingerprints belonged to Mel Spiegel, the tenant who owned the rifle. The defence suggested that maybe Mel Spiegel or someone else had committed the murders. Defence attorney Robert Pangburn argued that someone could have escaped the Johnson home on foot following the crime. He said there was no overwhelmingly conclusive evidence that Sarah had showered or cleaned up before she ran into the street after her parents' deaths. But the prosecution refuted these claims. They said there was absolutely no evidence to connect anyone else to the crime scene or the home. All of the physical evidence pointed towards Sarah. The DNA evidence, the paint transfer evidence, the gunpowder residue, the blood on Sarah's socks, and Sarah's changing stories all pointed to her guilt. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours over 3 days, beginning Monday, March 14, 2005. On March 16, 2005, the jury returned their verdict at approximately 3:55 in the afternoon. They found Sarah Marie Johnson guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Sarah was now 18 years old. She had been 16 at the time of the murders. The prosecution said they would seek life in prison. Prosecutor Jim Thomas said they would ask for 2 consecutive life sentences. He said that with the level of premeditation and the egregious nature of the crimes, Sarah should spend the rest of her natural life in prison. Deputy Prosecutor Justin Watcott said the facts of the case provided all they needed for aggravation at the sentencing hearing. A sentencing hearing was scheduled for May 19th and 20th, 2005. Under Idaho law, the judge was required to sentence Sarah to life terms in prison for each murder count. The question was whether she would be eligible for parole and after how many years. The final sentencing actually occurred on March 30th, 2005. Judge Barry Wood sentenced Sarah Marie Johnson to 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. Judge Wood also added a 15-year firearm enhancement to the sentence. This meant Sarah would serve 2 fixed life terms without parole, plus 15 years for using a firearm in the commission of the murders. Sarah would spend the rest of her life in prison, with no chance of ever being released. Sarah's grandmother, Pat Dishman, spoke after the verdict. She said it was bittersweet, but it was a just decision. She said it was very hard because they loved Sarah too. She said she hoped that someday Sarah would find peace. Sarah Marie Johnson appealed her conviction multiple times. In 2008, the Idaho Supreme Court upheld her conviction and sentence. In 2012, Sarah's lawyers filed a petition for a new trial. They charged that she had ineffective legal counsel during the murder trial. They cited the absence of any blood spatter on Sarah when she was found after the murders. They also brought up the fact that fingerprints on the murder weapon matched Mel Spiegel's, not Sarah's. In October 2014, this request was denied. In 2017, Sarah tried to get her life sentence reduced. She cited the Miller v. Alabama and Montgomery v. Louisiana Supreme Court rulings. These rulings dealt with sentencing juveniles to life without parole. However, her sentence was upheld. The courts found that even though new DNA testing technology existed, testing additional samples would not prove Sarah was innocent. The court said that even if someone else's DNA was found, it would not prove that person was present at the time of the murders, or that Sarah did not aid and abet in the murders. Sarah Marie Johnson is currently imprisoned at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Her prisoner number is 77613. She continues to maintain her innocence. As recently as 2014, Sarah was claiming someone else killed her parents. She drew the Idaho Innocence Project into her case, but they were not successful in getting her conviction overturned. Bruno Santos, the boyfriend who was the apparent motivation for Sarah's crimes, also faced legal troubles. Around the time of Sarah's trial in 2005, he served some jail time related to drug charges. In 2010, Blaine County brought new drug charges against him, including the sale of a half-pound of methamphetamine to an undercover detective. In 2011, he received a 10-year sentence and was sent to the Idaho State Correctional Facility. Santos received parole in May 2018. He could face deportation to Mexico since he is allegedly in the United States illegally. The Johnson family home where the murders occurred was eventually dealt with, though specific details about what happened to the property are not widely reported. The case has been featured in numerous films, television shows, podcasts, and other works, including Forensic Files, Deadly Women, and various true crime podcasts. Sarah Marie Johnson was 16 years old when she killed her mother Diane Johnson and her father Alan Scott Johnson on September 2, 2003 in Bellevue, Idaho. She was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder on March 16, 2005. She was sentenced to 2 concurrent fixed life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus a 15-year firearm enhancement. Sarah Marie Johnson will spend the rest of her life in prison for murdering her parents because they disapproved of her relationship with her 19-year-old boyfriend. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 4. Case number 4. Nicholas Wagoner Browning was 15 years old when he murdered his entire family on February 2, 2008. He lived with his father, John W. Browning, his mother, Tamara Browning, and his 2 younger brothers in Cockeysville, Maryland. Cockeysville is an upscale suburb of Baltimore in Baltimore County. The family lived in a large home at 10,905 Powers Avenue. The house was built in 1994 and sat on an enormous lawn. Nicholas was born on February 9, 1992. His father, John, was 45 years old and worked as an attorney at the law firm Royston, Mueller, McLean & Reed in nearby Towson, Maryland. His mother, Tamara, was 44 years old and was a stay-at-home mum. Nicholas had 2 younger brothers. His brother Gregory was 14 years old, some sources say 13. His brother Benjamin was 11 years old. Nicholas was the oldest child in the family. The Browning family was well respected in their community. They were active members of Epworth United Methodist Church. John Browning was a Boy Scout leader. The family seemed outwardly perfect to people who knew them. Nearly 1,300 people attended the funeral service for the family after they were killed. This showed how many people in the community knew and respected the Brownings. Nicholas Browning was an honours student at Delaney High School in nearby Timonium. He had an IQ of 125, which is considered very high. Nicholas played varsity golf from lacrosse at his school. He was a member of the Boy Scouts and had worked on an Eagle Scout project. His Eagle Scout project was building a prayer garden for Epworth United Methodist Church. The prayer garden was completed in the fall of 2007, just a few months before the murders. To people at school and church, Nicholas seemed like a bright, hard-working student from a good family. However, beneath the surface, there were serious problems in the Browning family. According to testimony that came out later, Nicholas had a difficult relationship with his parents, especially his father. A forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Neil H. Blumberg later testified that Nicholas was physically and verbally abused by his parents. Dr. Blumberg said that Nicholas thought he could do nothing to please his parents. The psychiatrist testified that relatives and friends told him they had seen Nicholas's parents abuse him. One family friend wrote a letter saying that Nicholas would cringe when he was near his father. The defense claimed that John Browning was an alcoholic. Dr. Blumberg said the family had a history of alcoholism, and that John, Tamara, and Nicholas all abused alcohol. The children in the family allegedly referred to their father as Hitler. This nickname suggested they feared him and felt he was very controlling. Nicholas had been arguing with his father in the time leading up to the murders. Some sources reported tensions between Nicholas and his parents over discipline and control issues. On Friday evening, February 1st, 2008, Nicholas went to spend the night at a friend's house. This was 1 week before Nicholas's 16th birthday. Nicholas and 2 other teenage boys attended a sleepover at a mutual friend's home. While Nicholas was at the sleepover, he made an important phone call. He called his younger brother Gregory and asked him to make sure the basement door at their house was left unlocked. Gregory did what his older brother asked. He left the basement door unlocked. That night, Nicholas and his friends made plans to drive around the neighbourhood. Shortly after midnight on Saturday, February 2nd, 2008, Nicholas told his friends he was going back to his house to get his car. The car was parked in his driveway. Nicholas said he would drive back to the sleepover in his car. The 15-year-old honours student walked the 20-minute journey back to his home by himself. His friends stayed at the sleepover waiting for him to return with the car. When Nicholas arrived at his family's home on Powers Avenue, he entered through the basement door that Gregory had left unlocked for him. He went to an unfinished work area in the basement. There he put on a pair of gloves. He picked up a handgun that belonged to his father. The gun was a 9mm pistol. He also grabbed a spare magazine for the gun. Nicholas went upstairs from the basement. His father John was asleep on a sofa on the first floor in the family room. Nicholas approached his sleeping father. He stood over him. Then Nicholas put the gun to his father's head and shot him. John Browning died from the gunshot wound to his head. This was the first murder. After shooting his father, Nicholas waited to see if the rest of his family would come downstairs. He listened for sounds from upstairs. When his mother and brothers did not stir or come to investigate the gunshot, Nicholas went upstairs. He went to his mother's bedroom. Tamara was sleeping in her bed. Nicholas shot her twice as she slept. Both shots hit her in the head. Tamara Browning died from these gunshot wounds. Then Nicholas moved on to his brother's bedroom. Gregory and Benjamin shared a bedroom. Nicholas shot Gregory once in the head while Gregory was sleeping in his bed. At that point, Benjamin began to stir. The youngest brother started to wake up. Benjamin realized something terrible was happening. He lifted his hand to try to shield himself from his older brother. Nicholas shot Benjamin twice in the face. One bullet hit Benjamin in the face. Another bullet grazed Benjamin's left index finger where he had raised his hand to protect himself. This showed that Benjamin had tried to defend himself in his final moments. Benjamin Browning died from his injuries. Nicholas had now killed his entire family. His father John was dead on the sofa downstairs. His mother Tamara was dead in her bedroom. His brother Gregory was dead in the brother's bedroom. His youngest brother Benjamin was also dead in that same bedroom. All 4 victims had been shot in the head while they slept or were just waking up. There was no sign of a struggle. No valuables were missing from the house. There were no signs of a break-in. This indicated the crime was an execution, not a robbery gone wrong. After the murders, Nicholas left the house. He walked down the road and threw the murder weapon into some bushes near the house. Then he walked back toward his friend's house, where the sleepover was happening. A few hours later, Nicholas returned to the sleepover. When his friends asked where he had been and why he took so long, Nicholas claimed that he had accidentally fallen asleep in his car. His friends accepted this explanation. Nicholas spent the rest of the night at the sleepover. He played video games with his friends and pretended nothing had happened. On Saturday during the day, on February 2nd, Nicholas and his friends went to a shopping mall. Nicholas appeared to be acting normally. He hung out with his friends as if it was a regular day. Throughout the day, Nicholas placed several phone calls to his family. He left them messages saying he loved them and would see them soon. Of course, Nicholas knew his entire family was dead in their home, but he was creating an alibi and trying to make it look like he expected them to be alive. On Saturday evening, a friend's father drove Nicholas and the other boys back to the Browning house on Powers Avenue. When they arrived at the house, Nicholas walked inside alone. A few moments later, Nicholas came out of the house. He told the friend's father that something was wrong with his dad. The friend's father went inside to check. He saw John Browning's body on the sofa. He immediately called 911. Police from Baltimore County arrived at the scene. They discovered all 4 bodies. John Browning was found dead on the sofa in the family room. Tamara Browning was found dead in her bedroom. Gregory Browning and Benjamin Browning were found dead in their shared bedroom. All 4 had been killed by gunshot wounds to the head. The police secured the scene and began their investigation. At first, Nicholas tried to blame the crime on a robbery gone wrong. He told police that someone must have broken into the house and killed his family while trying to rob them. But investigators quickly found problems with this story. Nothing was missing from the house. There was no sign of forced entry. The basement door had been left unlocked, but there was no evidence of an intruder. Police questioned Nicholas and his friends separately. During these interviews, investigators found a number of holes in Nicholas's story. His behaviour also red flags. Nicholas appeared unusually calm for someone who had just discovered his entire family murdered. He did not show the kind of emotional distress that would be expected. Detectives decided to take Nicholas Browning to the police station for further questioning. They turned up the heat on the 15-year-old. It took about 6 hours of questioning, but Nicholas eventually broke down. He confessed to the crime. In a videotaped confession to Baltimore County Police, Nicholas described the murders in detail. He told investigators that in the early hours of February 2, 2008, he had grabbed his father's gun. He explained how he shot his father in the head while John was sleeping on the couch. Nicholas said that after shooting his father, he realised he had already gone so far. He felt he could not just walk away from what he had done, so he continued and murdered the rest of his family. Police asked Nicholas why he murdered his family in the first place. In his confession, Nicholas told them that he wanted the inheritance money. Prosecutors later argued that Nicholas's true motive was to gain access to a substantial inheritance and insurance payout. They said Nicholas killed his parents because he did not want anyone telling him what to do. They said he killed his brothers so he would not have to share his inheritance with them. There was also evidence that Nicholas had been planning something for months. Prosecutors said that months before the murders, Nicholas had told someone on the school bus that he was sick of his father telling him what to do. He allegedly said he was going to kill his brothers because he did not want to share the inheritance. This suggested the murders were premeditated and not a sudden act of rage. After his confession, Nicholas told police where they could find the murder weapon. He led them to the bushes where he had thrown the 9mm pistol. Police recovered the gun. Nicholas Waggoner Browning was formally arrested at the Baltimore County Police Department around 1 o'clock in the morning on February 3, 2008. He was charged as an adult with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The news of the murders shocked the Cockeysville community. Dulaney High School, where Nicholas was a student, was deeply affected. The Browning family had been well known and respected. People could not believe that Nicholas, an honours student and Boy Scout, had killed his entire family. The murders had a ripple effect throughout the community. Judge Ann Brobst, who later worked as a state's attorney on the case, said she could not imagine anything more tragic. She said the crime still reverberated years later. Nicholas's case moved through the court system. He was too young under Maryland state law to face the death penalty. He had been a week shy of his 16th birthday at the time of the murders. His defense team began building a case based on abuse and mental health issues. Dr. Neil H. Blumberg, a forensic psychiatrist hired by the defense, evaluated Nicholas. Dr. Blumberg testified at a hearing that Nicholas had been physically and verbally abused by his parents. The psychiatrist said Nicholas had disruptions in consciousness, memory, and perception on the night of the killings. Dr. Blumberg testified that Nicholas indicated he was in a trance-like state during the murders. The psychiatrist suggested Nicholas suffered from a dissociative disorder. However, state psychiatrists disagreed with this assessment. They evaluated Nicholas and said they did not believe he was mentally ill. They found no diagnosable mental illnesses. The state's position was that Nicholas knew exactly what he was doing when he killed his family. Family members had different reactions to Nicholas's crimes. Some family members, including Mark and Cindy Vornecki, wrote letters asking for leniency. In a letter to the judge, they wrote that they wanted Nicholas to accept responsibility for what he had done. They said he should receive treatment to deal with the previous abuse he had suffered. They wanted him to learn new coping mechanisms that would help him successfully rejoin society and their family. Other family members were not as forgiving. Sally Browning, who was John Browning's sister, wrote a letter expressing her anger and pain. She asked if Nicholas actually thought he was going to be charged as a juvenile and walk away from his crimes. She said she would never understand why they were all living this hellish nightmare. She wrote that they all got a life sentence too. On Monday, October 27, 2008, Nicholas Browning pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was 16 years old at the time of his plea. In exchange for his guilty plea, prosecutors agreed that he would not serve life without the possibility of parole. Nicholas would serve at least 2 decades in prison before becoming eligible for parole. This plea deal meant there would be no trial. According to the statement of the crime read in court during the plea hearing, Nicholas had asked his brother Gregory to leave the basement door unlocked. He walked home from his friend's house after midnight. In the basement, he put on gloves and picked up his father's handgun and a spare magazine. He shot his father in the head as John slept on the sofa. When the rest of the family failed to come downstairs, he went to his mother's bedroom and shot her twice as she slept. Then he went to his brother's bedroom. He shot Gregory once in the head. When Benjamin began to stir and lifted his hand to shield himself, Nicholas shot his youngest brother twice in the face. Nicholas Browning was sentenced on January 23, 2009. Judge Thomas Bollinger presided over the sentencing. Nicholas was sentenced to 4 life terms in prison. 2 of the life sentences were ordered to run consecutive to each other. The other 2 life sentences were concurrent. This meant Nicholas would serve at least 2 life sentences back to back. Under Maryland state parole guidelines, Nicholas could become eligible for parole after serving 23 years if he was a model inmate. This meant he could potentially be considered for parole in 2031, when he would be 39 years old. However, state officials noted that murderers are rarely granted parole at their first hearing. There was no guarantee Nicholas would ever be released. The defense lawyers asked that Nicholas serve his sentence at Patuxent Institution in Jessup, Maryland. Patuxent is a facility that provides psychiatric treatment. This request was granted. Nicholas was sent to Patuxent Institution to serve his sentence. In 2012, when Nicholas was 19 years old, he created a profile on a website called goodprisoner.com. This website solicits pen pals for inmates. In his profile, Nicholas wrote that he had a long road ahead of him. He said he would love to have someone to talk to through his messed up journey. The profile listed that Nicholas was afraid of dying in prison. He said he wished he could make something of his life. News of the pen pal account was reported by local media. Some people were upset that Nicholas was seeking attention in this way. One person who contacted Nicholas through the website was Michael Gaffney. Michael became a pen pal who regularly visited Nicholas in prison. Michael came to court to support Nicholas at later hearings. Nicholas appeared to have formed some friendships despite being in prison. In 2014, when Nicholas was 21 years old, his attorneys filed a motion to modify his sentence. A hearing was held on Friday, December 5, 2014, in Baltimore County Circuit Court. Nicholas's defense team argued that a sentence reduction would make him eligible for treatment in a youth offender program at Patuxent Institution. They asked for 1 life sentence with the balance concurrent. They requested suspension of all but 30 years. This would have made Nicholas eligible for release much sooner. During the hearing, Nicholas spoke to the court. He apologized to his family. He reflected on the murders and said that words could not describe what he did. He said he would give his own life. Despite this apology, prosecutors argued strongly against any sentence reduction. Assistant State's Attorney Robin Coffin represented the prosecution. She argued that Nicholas should never get out of prison. She said he had reasons for the murders and executed them as if he was a professional hitman. She reminded the court that months before the murders, Nicholas had told someone on the bus he was sick of his father telling him what to do. He said he was going to kill his brothers because he did not want to share the inheritance. This showed premeditation and a cold, calculated motive. The judge denied the motion to modify Nicholas's sentence. Nicholas would continue to serve his 4 life terms with 2 consecutive life sentences. The judge did not believe Nicholas deserved a reduced sentence, given the severity of his crimes. Nicholas Browning is currently serving his sentence at Patuxent Institution in Jessup, Maryland. He turned 31 years old in prison in February 2023. He will be eligible for parole in 2031 when he is 39 years old. However, there is no guarantee he will be granted parole at that time. Many people believe he should never be released, given that he murdered his entire family in cold blood. The house where the murders occurred, at 10,905 Powers Avenue, has remained a place of tragedy. In February 2023, 15 years after the Browning family murders, another violent incident occurred at the exact same house. A man named David Emery Linthicum shot a Baltimore County police officer multiple times at that address. The shooting occurred in the same basement that Nicholas had entered during the early hours of February 2, 2008. This led to a massive manhunt. Linthicum was eventually captured and sentenced to 2 life sentences in May 2025 for the attempted murder of police officers. The house has now become known for two separate violent crimes 15 years apart. Property records show the house at 10,905 Powers Avenue was last sold in 2019. Google Street View images from September 2023 show that the windows of the house have been boarded up. The house stands as a reminder of the terrible tragedy that occurred there in 2008. Nicholas Wagner Browning was 15 years old when he murdered his father, John W. Browning, age 45, his mother, Tamara Browning, age 44, his brother, Gregory Browning, age 14, and his brother, Benjamin Browning, age 11, on February 2, 2008, in Cockeysville, Maryland. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder in October 2008. He was sentenced in January 2009 to 4 life terms, with 2 life terms running consecutively. Nicholas Browning murdered his entire family as they slept in their beds, then spent the day with friends pretending nothing had happened before staging the discovery of their bodies. He will remain in prison serving his sentence. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 5. Case number 5. David Francis Brom was 16 years old when he murdered his entire family on February 18, 1988. He lived with his parents and 3 siblings in Rochester, Minnesota. Rochester is a city in Olmsted County in southeastern Minnesota. The Brom family lived in Cascade Township, a more rural area on the northwest side of Rochester. David was born on October 3, 1971. His father was Bernard Brom, who was 41 years old. Some sources say 43. His mother was Paulette Brom, who was 41 years old. Some sources say 40 or 42. David had 3 siblings. His older brother Joe was 18 or 19 years old. His younger sister Diane was 13 years old. Some sources say 14. His youngest brother was Richard, who went by Ricky. Ricky was 11 years old. Some sources say 9. The Brom family appeared to be a typical middle-class family from the outside. Bernard and Paulette had what looked like the American dream. They owned a nice home. The family was actively involved in their Catholic church. The Broms looked to outside observers like a normal, respectable family. However, beneath the surface, there were serious problems. David attended Lourdes High School in Rochester. He was a sophomore. Friends later told investigators that David had confided in them about alleged abuse taking place in the home. Multiple friends said David's parents constantly made him chop wood to warm their home. Witnesses shared that David's parents had kicked his older brother Joe out of the house 2 years prior to the murders. A school counsellor told investigators the family may have been struggling and attending family counselling. David and 2 of his friends had devised a plan together. They planned to leave their Rochester lives behind, steal David's parents' money, go to Florida for a vacation of a lifetime, and when the money ran out, they would kill themselves. According to interviews with the 2 friends conducted later by investigators, they thought it was a joke. They never took it seriously when David would tell them about his fantasy to murder his family. The friends thought David was just talking. They did not believe he would actually do it. On the night of February 17, 1988, David and his father Bernard got into an argument. They were talking about a music record. The argument was about heavy metal music that David was listening to. The verbal argument happened at around 11:30 at night. David went to bed but could not sleep. He stayed up thinking about what had happened. David later told a friend that he stayed up until about 3 in the morning. Sometime between 1:30 and 3 in the morning on February 18, 1988, David got out of bed. He went downstairs and retrieved an axe. The axe was 28 inches long. It was a regular wood-chopping axe. David took the axe and went upstairs to his parents' bedroom. Bernard and Paulette were sleeping in their bed. David entered his parents' bedroom. He approached his father first. David brought the axe down onto Bernard multiple times. He struck his father repeatedly in the head and upper body. According to what David later told a friend, his father kept getting up. David said he hit his dad with the axe, and his dad kept getting up. David said he just kept swinging. Bernard Brom died from his injuries. After killing his father, David moved to the other side of the bed, where his mother Paulette was sleeping. David struck his mother with the axe multiple times. He hit her in the head and upper body. Paulette Brom died from her injuries. David then left his parents' bedroom and went to his brother Ricky's room. Ricky was sleeping. David struck Ricky with the axe. Ricky screamed when he was hit. David screamed too. David left Ricky's room after hitting him with the axe. Ricky died from his injuries. At some point during the attacks, David's sister Diane woke up. According to what David later told his friend, Diane was standing over their mother's body. Both Diane and David started screaming when they saw each other. David struck Diane with the axe. Diane died from her injuries. David told his friend later that he just kept on swinging for about half an hour. He said it was really gross. He told his friend that someone has to be sick to be doing something like this. Autopsy reports would later show there were 56 wounds across the 4 victims. Most of the wounds were to the head and upper body. All 4 victims had sustained numerous gashes in the head and upper body from the axe attacks. After killing his entire family, David went downstairs. He left the blood-stained axe at the bottom of the basement stairs. Police would later find the axe in the basement. Forensic tests indicated the axe was used to kill all 4 victims. Tests also revealed the axe handle had David's palm prints and fingerprints on it. David got ready for school that morning as if it was a normal day. He gathered some items for what he planned to do next. He took his parents' cash card. He packed a toothbrush, a comb, cans of Mountain Dew and candy. He planned to escape. David intended to drive a van to Florida as part of the plan he had discussed with his friends. On the morning of February 18, 1988, David showed up at Lourdes High School. He found one of his friends, a 17-year-old girl named Anique. David stopped Anique as she was walking to school. He convinced her to skip school with him. They walked together toward David's van. As they were walking, David told Anique something shocking. He told her he had killed his parents. Anique did not believe him at first, but David provided details. He explained to her that he got into a fight with his parents over the heavy metal music he was listening to. He described how he had killed his parents, his brother, and his sister. He told her the whole story of what happened in the house. Anique realized David was telling the truth. David and Anique traveled to numerous places around Rochester that day. They made stops at a grocery store and a park. They went to Anique's house where David changed his clothes. They went to Kmart where David bought some hair clippers and gum. They returned to Anique's home. They were interrupted when Anique's mother came home and made Anique go back to school. David also went to lunch with a group of friends from John Marshall High School at Godfather's Pizza. He acted like everything was normal. None of these friends knew what had happened. Anique did not see David again until he stopped in to see her at work at about 5:30 in the afternoon. At that time, David told Anique he would be sleeping under a bridge. He said he would be travelling the next day to Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. Anique told him she thought the authorities knew what happened. David said to just not tell anyone. Meanwhile, rumours were circulating among students at Lourdes High School. Word was spreading that something had happened to David Brom's family. School officials overheard some of these disturbing rumours from students. The school counsellors became concerned that the Brom family was in trouble. They decided to notify law enforcement. At 5:23 in the evening on February 18, 1988, the Olmsted County Sheriff's Office received a call from Lourdes High School officials. Deputies were dispatched to check on the Brom family residence. Deputy Kevin Torgerson was sent to the scene. He was 29 years old and in his second year on the force. All Deputy Torgerson knew was that there was something wrong and that David Brom had made some kind of threat to his dad. Deputy Torgerson arrived at the Brom home in Cascade Township. There was fresh snow on the ground. Torgerson noticed sets of tyre tracks up and down the driveway. He chatted with a neighbour at the scene and waited for a second deputy named Mike Braley to arrive. When Deputy Braley got there, they walked up the driveway together. They followed footprints to and into the garage service door. They entered through the unlocked garage door. What the deputies found inside was horrific. They discovered the bodies of all 4 family members on the second floor of the home. Bernard Brom, Paulette Brom, Diane Brom, and Richard Brom were all dead. The scene was extremely disturbing. There was blood everywhere. Deputy Torgerson would later say he could never forget the sights and smells of what he saw that evening. He said it was one of the most terrible things he had encountered in his entire law enforcement career. Sheriff Kevin Torgerson later said that Alfred Hitchcock could not write a script to really describe what happened in that house. He said it must have been incredibly terrifying. Immediately after the discovery, police were concerned that David might be the victim of an abduction. 2 sons were missing from the home. Joe, the oldest son, was not living at home anymore. David, the 16-year-old, was unaccounted for. Police did not know at first if David was a victim or a suspect. However, police quickly learned the truth from David's friends. Anik and other students told authorities what David had said. The friends reported that David himself had told them he killed his family. This information led police to begin a massive manhunt for David Brom. Law enforcement officers and citizens were put on alert. Police were looking for a van that David Brom was believed to be driving. David did not drive far. After leaving Anik at her workplace, David spent most of the night of February 18th hiding. He slept in a culvert at a nearby concrete plant. A culvert is a tunnel that allows water to flow under a road or railway. David hid in this cement culvert throughout the night. In the culvert, investigators later found items David had brought with him. They found the cash card belonging to his parents, his toothbrush, his comb, the cans of Mountain Dew and candy. These were the items David had packed for his attempted getaway. On the morning of February 19, 1988, David emerged from the culvert. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, he was spotted using a payphone near the Valley High Post Office in northwest Rochester. A member of the public saw him making the call and contacted authorities. Rochester police officers arrived at the scene. They arrested David Brom without incident. He was captured while still on the phone. During the arrest, officers overheard David say on the phone that it was too late now. David was detained and taken to the law enforcement centre. In the car on the way there, deputies told David they had a lot of questions for him. David replied with the words, "Yeah, shoot." However, when investigators began questioning David, the interview ended after only 3 minutes. David asked for an attorney, and the interrogation stopped immediately. David Francis Brom was formally arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was also charged with 8 counts of second-degree murder. David was held in jail under 24-hour surveillance. He appeared calm throughout his arrest and arraignment. A psychiatric examination was ordered for the teenager. David's attorney was Terry Walters. Walters recalled seeing his client for the first time. He said his first reaction was, "You have got to be kidding." Walters said David could not have weighed more than 120 pounds. He was skinny as a rail. He had braces on his teeth. He was gangly and gawky. Walters said David was 16, but could have passed for 14. During his time in custody before trial, jail monitors observed David. They reported that he seemed normal. David would make conversation about cars or friends. The monitors said David would sleep through the night. They also said he would watch the Oprah Winfrey Show. These were all signs that led jail monitors to believe David was mentally stable. David's case was initially referred to the juvenile court system because he was only 16 years old at the time of the crimes. However, the case was eventually sent to the adult judicial system based on the severity of the crime. The murders were considered too serious to be handled in juvenile court. David Brom pleaded not guilty. He also pleaded not guilty by reason of mental illness. His defense was based on an insanity claim. The question of whether David was legally insane at the time of the crime became a major focus of the trial. David's trial took place in October 1989, more than a year and a half after the murders. The trial was held in Olmsted District Court. Because David's defense was insanity, mental illness became a major factor. Much media and legal focus was placed on Minnesota's use of the McNaughton rules in determining if David was legally insane at the time of the crime. The McNaughton rules are a legal standard used to determine criminal insanity. 7 or 8 mental health professionals evaluated David. The evaluations produced different conclusions. 4 psychiatrists testified for the prosecution. 2 of them found David was not legally insane at the time of the crime. The defense presented a forensic psychologist who testified that David had been suffering from visual hallucinations for a period of years. This expert said David had alter egos and 3 distinct personalities. He attributed the murders to a psychotic episode. However, most of the mental health professionals found David to be mentally competent. All the psychiatrists agreed David suffered from some form of mental health issues, but the majority concluded he was not legally insane when he committed the murders. The prosecution and judge were skeptical of the defense expert's analysis about hallucinations and multiple personalities. At trial, David's friend Anik testified about what David had told her on the morning of February 18th, 1988. She described how David stopped her as she was going to school and convinced her to skip school with him. She testified that David detailed how he killed his parents, brother, and sister. She told the jury that David said he hit his dad with an axe and his dad kept getting up. David said he just kept swinging. Anik described how David explained the sequence of events in the house. Her testimony was powerful evidence that David had committed the crimes and that he understood what he had done. The prosecution presented the physical evidence. They showed the blood-stained axe found in the basement. They presented forensic evidence showing David's fingerprints and palm prints on the axe handle. They showed that the axe had been used to kill all 4 victims. They presented the autopsy reports showing the 56 wounds across the 4 victims. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated. They took 2.5 days to reach their verdict. On October 16, 1989, the jury found David Brom guilty. He was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The jury rejected the insanity defence. Judge Ancy Morse presided over the sentencing. The judge had to decide what sentence to impose on David. Under Minnesota law at the time, David was given 3 consecutive life sentences and 1 concurrent life sentence. This meant 3 of the life sentences would be served one after another, while the 4th would be served at the same time as one of the others. Under the sentencing rules that existed in 1989, David had to serve a minimum number of years before becoming eligible for parole. The original calculation meant David would need to serve 52 years and 6 months before he could be considered for parole. Under that timeline, David would not be eligible for parole until 2041. He would be 70 years old before he could even be considered for release. David Brom appealed his conviction. On November 30, 1990, the Minnesota Supreme Court issued a ruling in State v. Brom. The Supreme Court affirmed David's conviction. The appeals failed. David would serve his time in Minnesota state prisons. David was housed at different facilities over the years. He spent time at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Stillwater. Later, he was transferred to the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Lino Lakes. David has now served more than 35 years behind bars. During his time in prison, David has reportedly done well. He has had a good disciplinary record. He worked to change himself while incarcerated. He participated in programs and treatment. People who have interacted with David in prison say he has shown remorse for his actions. David has apologized to the family and friends of the people he killed. He has also apologized to the community of Rochester. In 2023, Minnesota passed a new law that dramatically changed David Brom's situation. The Minnesota legislature passed a law as part of a sweeping public safety bill. The law eliminated life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders. The law was based on rulings from the United States Supreme Court. In 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that states could no longer impose mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles. The court found that juveniles are different from adults and should be treated differently by the justice system. The 2023 Minnesota law made it so that juvenile offenders sentenced to life must be fully eligible for parole after 15 years behind bars. The law was retroactive. This means it applied to people who had already been sentenced before the law was passed. David Brom fell under this new law. Even though he had been sentenced in 1989, the new law applied to him because he was 16 years old when he committed his crimes. Under the new law, David Brom became eligible for parole retroactively as of 2018. This was a huge change. Under the old law, David would have had to serve a minimum of 51 or 52 years. He would not have been eligible for parole until 2037 or 2041. With the law change, David became eligible for parole many decades earlier than originally planned. In January 2025, David Brom appeared before the Supervised Release Board for a parole hearing. The board evaluates several factors when considering parole. They look at the person's behaviour while incarcerated. They review psychological assessments. They consider statements from victims or their families. During the hearing, David said he had spent his time in prison working to change the things about his life that led to the decisions he made. He said he believed himself to be a good example of what a transformation can look like. The Supervised Release Board voted on David's case. The vote was 5-1. The board approved a plan that would allow David to be granted work release as he continued his step down toward full release. David was not granted regular parole right away. Instead, he was approved for work release, which is a transitional step. On July 29, 2025, David Brom was released from the Minnesota Correctional Facility at Lino Lakes. He left the facility during the overnight hours. He was transferred to a halfway house in the Twin Cities area. The specific location of the halfway house was not made public for safety reasons. David is now 53 years old. David's release comes with strict conditions. He must work or go to school full-time. He must develop a work release plan with his caseworker. He must meet regularly with his caseworker to review whether progress is being made. David must adhere to a strict schedule and all aspects of his release plan. Any deviation from approved plans or schedules may result in him being sent back to prison. David is subject to supervision and GPS monitoring. He wears a GPS bracelet so authorities can track his location at all times. He receives ongoing case management. David Brom's release has been controversial. Many people in Rochester and throughout Minnesota have strong feelings about whether he should have been released. Some lawmakers criticized the 2023 law change. Representative Lisa DeMuth, Speaker of the Minnesota House, said the law does not ensure safety in the state of Minnesota. She said she was very disappointed and concerned. She said lawmakers would revisit the law and change it when they got back into session. Other lawmakers defended the law. Representative Sandra Feist wrote the bill that became law. She said David's release was in line with Supreme Court rulings. She pointed out that the law reflects the understanding that juveniles are different from adults and should have the possibility of rehabilitation. Olmsted County Sheriff Kevin Torgerson, the deputy who first responded to the Brom home in 1988, released a statement about David's release. Torgerson said it was still hard for him to accept and forget the sights and smells of what he saw that evening in 1988. However, he also said that the public must trust the parole board's decision and must hope David Brom is ready for this transition in his life. Torgerson noted that Diane and little Ricky could be parents and productive members of society, but were never given the chance due to David's selfish, immature, 16-year-old actions. Torgerson acknowledged that David has done remarkably well in various prison settings and has reached an understanding of the seriousness of his crimes. Former Olmsted County Attorney Mark Ostrom, who is now retired, expressed concerns about the law change. Ostrom said the law undoes the certainty of sentences carefully decided by judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. He said victims are often hopeful that somebody is going to serve a sentence and be gone from a community for a set period of time. Ostrom said he was not ready for David to come back. He noted there was no doubt in his mind that David Brom would benefit from the new statute. Ostrom explained that Judge Ancy Morse thoughtfully crafted David's sentence with the opportunity to get out, but much later down the road. Ostrom said David will ultimately not serve the sentence that Judge Morse wanted him to serve for each of those victims. However, Ostrom also acknowledged that David has made improvements during his incarceration. He said David has been institutionalized for so long that there are concerns about his readiness. Ostrom noted that there were no cell phones when David went to prison, and that all the changes society has gone through mean David is not fully prepared yet. Minnesota Department of Corrections Commissioner Paul Schnell spoke about David's case. Schnell explained that work release has been around since the 1980s and has been successful in helping incarcerated individuals re-establish themselves in the community. He said the transition is important for people to become accustomed to operating in society again. Schnell said David's chances of re-offending are low. David Brom's next appearance before the Supervised Release Board is scheduled for January 2026. At that hearing, the board will review his progress and decide whether he can continue on work release or move toward full release into the community. David Francis Brom was 16 years old when he murdered his father, Bernard Brom, his mother, Paulette Brom, his 13-year-old sister, Diane Brom, and his 11-year-old brother, Richard Brom, on February 18, 1988, in Rochester, Minnesota. He used an axe to kill all 4 family members as they slept. He was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He served more than 35 years behind bars. In July 2025, David was released to a work release program under Minnesota's new law restricting life sentences for juvenile offenders. He now lives in a halfway house in the Twin Cities area under strict supervision and GPS monitoring. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number Robert Dingman was 17 years old when he and his younger brother Jeffrey killed both their parents in their Rochester, New Hampshire home in February 1996. Both brothers were convicted and sent to prison, with Robert receiving the harshest possible punishment allowed under law at that time. He was sentenced to life in prison without any chance of ever being released. The Dingman family lived on Old Dover Road in Rochester, a city in the southeastern part of New Hampshire. From the outside, they looked like many other middle-class American families in the mid-1990s. Vance Dingman worked as an electrician, while his wife Eve held a job as a customer service representative at a fabric plant. They were both 40 years old and had 2 sons together. Robert was the older child, attending Spalding High School as a junior. Jeffrey was only 14 and still in middle school. Neighbours and extended family members who knew the Dingmans described Vance and Eve as hard-working parents who seemed devoted to their children. The couple had taken their sons on trips to Disney World. They showed up to watch their boys play in soccer games. They provided a comfortable home and everything their children appeared to need. The family had even drawn up wills that would leave over $200,000 in cash and life insurance to Robert and Jeffrey if anything ever happened to the parents. To people watching from the outside, the Dingman household seemed stable and normal. But Robert and Jeffrey felt differently about their home life. The teenage brothers believed their parents were too strict. They complained about the rules Vance and Eve enforced. The curfews felt unfair to them. Jeffrey later described how his mother would yell at him repeatedly when he brought home bad grades from school. He said his father would sometimes hit him in the chest over these poor grades. In one instance, Jeffrey claimed his father hit Robert in the face. However, when other family members were asked about this after the murders, they said they never saw any signs that the boys were being abused. They insisted Vance and Eve were good parents who loved their sons. What the parents probably did not know was that their teenage sons had started thinking about killing them. This was not a sudden decision made in a moment of anger. Friends of Robert from Spalding High School would later testify in court that he had talked about wanting to kill his parents before the murders actually happened. The boys considered multiple different plans for how they might do it. Jeffrey testified that they discussed several ideas, including poisoning their parents or finding a way to push them through thin ice. These schemes might have seemed like the wild fantasies of angry teenagers, the kind of dark thoughts that never actually turn into real actions. But for Robert and Jeffrey Dingman, the planning eventually became something real. The day the brothers chose to carry out their plan was a Friday in February 1996. Most sources report this as February 9th, though some documents list it as February 6th. What all sources agree on is that it happened on a Friday afternoon or early evening, and that the boys waited for their parents to come home from work. The teenagers had decided to ambush Vance and Eve, as each parent arrived home separately. They used their father's own gun for the killings, a .22 caliber handgun that Vance owned. Vance Dingman was the first parent to arrive home that Friday. According to testimony from Jeffrey, who later made a deal with prosecutors to testify against his older brother, the father walked into an ambush. Before Vance even had a chance to fully understand what was happening, Jeffrey fired the first shot at him, but then Robert took over. The older brother shot his father multiple times. According to Jeffrey's testimony in court, Robert taunted their father as he shot him. With Vance already wounded from the first shot, Robert allegedly asked him a cruel question before firing again. Jeffrey claimed Robert said words to the effect of asking if his father wanted another shot. Some accounts report the exact words as asking the father how he would like another one. After Vance was dead, the brothers had to hide his body before their mother came home. They wrapped their father's corpse in garbage bags and carried it up to the attic of their house. Then they waited for Eve to arrive. When their mother, Eve Dingman, came home from her job at the fabric plant, she walked into the same deadly trap her husband had encountered minutes, or perhaps around 20 minutes earlier. Jeffrey fired at her first, hitting her 2 or 3 times according to testimony. But again, Robert finished what his younger brother had started. According to Jeffrey, Robert fired the fatal shot that killed their mother. This was a shot to her head. Before pulling the trigger, Jeffrey testified that Robert spoke to their mother, allegedly telling her to die using an obscene word. The exact phrase Jeffrey claimed to have heard was Robert calling their mother a female dog and commanding her to die. With both parents now dead in their home, Robert and Jeffrey had to figure out what to do with the second body. They wrapped Eve in garbage bags just like they had done with their father, but instead of putting her body in the attic with Vance, they carried their mother's body down to the basement. The house now contained the corpses of both parents, hidden away in different parts of the building. The boys tried to clean up the blood. Robert reportedly used air freshener to cover up the smell of death that was starting to fill the house. What the brothers did next shocked investigators and prosecutors when they later learned about it. With both parents murdered and their bodies hidden away, Robert and Jeffrey did not act like people consumed with guilt or fear. Instead, they spent the entire weekend living as if they were free from any consequences. Robert reportedly peeled off the rubber gloves he had been wearing and went to visit his girlfriend. Jeffrey, who was only 14 years old, ate some Doritos and left the house to play basketball with a friend. Over the course of that weekend, the boys played and partied with their friends. They acted carefree, as if nothing unusual had happened in their home. The most disturbing detail to many people was that the brothers went back to school on Monday morning, as if everything was normal. They sat in their classrooms, they interacted with other students, they went through the motions of a regular school day. Meanwhile, their parents' bodies remained hidden in the family home, wrapped in garbage bags in the attic and basement. It was the parents' co-workers who finally raised the alarm. When Vance and Eve Dingman both failed to show up for work on Monday, their worried colleagues called the police. Something was clearly wrong. The couple had been reliable employees who did not just skip work without explanation. Officers went to the Dingman home on Old Dover Road to check on them. What the police found inside was the gruesome crime scene the brothers had tried to conceal. The bodies of both parents were discovered wrapped in garbage bags and tape. Fingerprint evidence on the tape would later connect Robert to the crime. The police immediately arrested both Robert and Jeffrey. The teenage brothers were taken into custody at school that Monday, just 3 days after they had murdered their parents. The carefree weekend was over. Now they would face the criminal justice system and the full weight of what they had done. The investigation moved quickly. Prosecutors had to decide how to charge the brothers. Because Jeffrey was only 14, there were questions about how to handle his case. Robert was 17, which at that time in New Hampshire meant he could be tried as an adult. The state offered Jeffrey a deal. If he would testify against his older brother Robert in court, they would let him plead guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder. The plea agreement meant Jeffrey could potentially get out of prison someday instead of spending his whole life locked up. Jeffrey took the deal. Robert Dingman went on trial in May 1997, about 15 months after the murders. He was 18 years old by the time his trial began. The trial lasted 9 days. Jeffrey took the witness stand against his brother. He testified about everything that had happened that Friday in February. He admitted that he had fired shots at both parents, but he insisted that Robert was the one who instigated the whole plan. Jeffrey painted a picture of his older brother as the mastermind who had pushed him into participating. He described Robert as the one who delivered the fatal shots to both Vance and Eve while taunting them in their final moments. Robert's defense lawyers had a very different story to tell. They chose not to call any witnesses during the trial. Robert himself never testified in his own defense. Instead, his lawyers argued during their opening and closing statements that Jeffrey was the one who fired all the shots. They claimed Jeffrey was lying to save himself from a harsher punishment. According to this version of events, Robert had only helped cover up the murders after Jeffrey committed them, but he had not actually pulled the trigger himself. Prosecutors brought in friends of Robert from Spalding High School to testify. These teenage witnesses told the jury that Robert had expressed a desire to kill his parents before the murders happened. The prosecution painted Robert as a teenager who resented his parents' rules and curfews so much that he planned their deaths. They presented the case as a premeditated and calculated double murder, not a spontaneous act of violence. The prosecutor who led the case was Assistant Attorney General John Kakavas. Years later, he would reflect on what had struck him most about the Dingman brothers. He told reporters that the lack of remorse from both teens was the most profound aspect of the case. The way the boys had gone about their weekend playing and partying, the way they had returned to school as if nothing had happened, suggested a chilling absence of guilt or regret in the immediate aftermath of the killings. The jury believed the prosecution. After hearing all the evidence and testimony over those 9 days, they found Robert Dingman guilty on all charges. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Superior Court Judge Bruce Mole sentenced him using the mandatory punishment that New Hampshire law required at that time for first-degree murder. Robert would spend the rest of his natural life in prison without any possibility of parole. The judge told Robert that this sentence was wholly justified by the brutality of his actions. Jeffrey Dingman received his sentence separately as part of his plea deal. He got 30 years to life in prison. Because his sentence included the possibility of parole, Jeffrey would potentially be able to get out someday if a parole board decided he had been rehabilitated and no longer posed a danger to society. For years, Robert Dingman lived in prison believing he would never walk free again. A life sentence without parole means exactly what it sounds like. He would grow old behind bars. He would die in prison. There would be no second chance, no opportunity to rebuild a life on the outside. This was his future, decided when he was just 18 years old for crimes he committed at 17. But then something unexpected happened in the legal world that would eventually affect Robert's case. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling in a case called Miller versus Alabama. The court decided that mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole were unconstitutional when given to juvenile offenders. The ruling said that sentencing someone under the age of 18 to die in prison without ever considering their youth was cruel and unusual punishment, which violated the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. The Supreme Court explained that young people are different from adults in important ways. Teenagers lack full maturity. They make more impulsive and reckless decisions than adults. They are more likely to take dangerous risks without thinking through the consequences. Their brains are still developing, especially the parts responsible for judgment and impulse control. The court also noted that young people have a much greater capacity for change and rehabilitation than adults. Someone who commits a terrible crime at age 14 or 17 might be capable of becoming a completely different person by the time they reach their 30s or 40s. Because of all these differences, the Supreme Court ruled that judges and juries must have the opportunity to consider a young person's age and circumstances before sentencing them to life without parole. These sentences could not be automatic or mandatory. This ruling applied to everyone who had been under 18 when they committed their crime, including Robert Dingman. Even though he had been tried as an adult back in 1997, he was still 17 years old when he killed his parents. That meant his mandatory life sentence without parole was now unconstitutional under the new Supreme Court ruling. New Hampshire had also made another relevant change since 1996. The state had raised the age of legal adulthood from 17 to 18. This gave Robert another avenue to challenge his sentence. Robert's lawyers filed for a resentencing hearing. After spending more than 2 decades behind bars believing he would never get out, Robert suddenly had a chance to argue for a different sentence. The hearing would allow a judge to look at his case again and consider whether he should be given an opportunity for parole someday. The resentencing hearing took place in October 2018. By this time, Robert was 40 years old. He had spent his entire adult life in prison. The hearing lasted 2 days and took place in Strafford County Superior Court in Dover, New Hampshire. This time, unlike at his original trial, Robert took the witness stand. He testified in his own defense. He told the court that his ability to make conscious decisions had not been fully formed when he was 17 years old. He was asking the judge to recognize that he was different now than he had been as a teenager. Robert's defense attorney, Meredith Lugo, asked the judge to sentence Robert to 25 years total. Since he had already served more than 20 years, this would mean he could potentially be released soon. The prosecution had a very different recommendation. Senior Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Strelzin asked the judge to give Robert 50 years, which would mean 25 years for each murder victim. Flag. I need to note that testimony about the exact details of who shot whom comes from Jeffrey's testimony, and Robert's defense contested this. The jury believed Jeffrey, but Robert's lawyers argued Jeffrey was lying to protect himself. I want to make sure I'm presenting this as contested testimony, not absolute fact. During the hearing, Strelzin reminded the court of the brutal nature of the crimes. He described how Vance Dingman had asked his sons if they wanted to go out for Mexican food right before they opened fire on him. He emphasized that this was not a crime of passion, but a premeditated and carefully planned double murder that the brothers carried out with deadly efficiency. He talked about how the boys used air freshener to try to cover up the smell while they partied that weekend. But Robert also had supporters who spoke on his behalf. His maternal grandmother and aunt had forgiven him. His aunt, Elizabeth Landry, wrote a letter to the court. She described taking care of Robert as a baby. She remembered bringing him to church and doing arts and crafts projects with him when he was a young child. She called him a sensitive child who cared about the feelings of others, even animals. She mentioned that when his parents got a pug dog named Emmy Lou Hairless, Robert loved the family pet. Landry and her husband told the court they were willing to take Robert into their home when he was released from prison. The judge also heard about Robert's behaviour during his more than 20 years in prison. He had maintained jobs while incarcerated. He had supported other inmates and served on a committee to advocate for prisoners with the prison staff. What impressed the judge was that Robert had done all of this work and tried to be a positive influence, even while believing he would never be released. He was trying to be a better person, without any hope that it would result in his freedom. Robert submitted a handwritten letter to the court. In it, he apologised for his actions and expressed remorse for the pain he had caused. He wrote that nobody wants to be defined by their worst acts, but he believed his worst acts did define him because they had become woven into who he was as a person. They changed how people looked at him and affected every decision he made. He said he lived his life constantly trying to make amends for what he did at 17. He told the court he would never forgive himself for what he had done, even though his grandmother and aunt had somehow found it in their hearts to forgive him. He expressed gratitude for their support while admitting he did not feel he deserved it. Judge Tina Nadeau had to make a difficult decision. On October 30th, 2018, she announced her ruling. She did not give Robert the 25 years his lawyer asked for, nor did she give him the 50 years the prosecution wanted. Instead, she sentenced him to 40 years, which meant 20 years to life for each of the two murders. The sentences would run one after the other rather than at the same time. This meant Robert would become eligible for parole after serving 40 years total from the date of his original conviction. The judge explained her reasoning. She noted that Robert's young age at the time of the crimes and his behaviour in prison demonstrated that he had the capacity to reform. She found the forgiveness and support from his maternal family members compelling. She believed that Robert deserved a chance, however distant, to eventually rejoin society if a parole board determined he was ready. The sentence meant that Robert could potentially appear before a parole board in 2035, when he would be 57 years old. At that point, he would have spent nearly 40 years behind bars. Whether he would actually be granted parole would depend on many factors that could not be predicted. A parole board would need to evaluate whether he had truly been rehabilitated, whether he posed a risk to public safety, and whether releasing him would serve justice. But at least now he had something he did not have before: hope. The prosecution was not happy with the sentence, but accepted the judge's decision. Strelzin told reporters that their goal had always been to get as much justice as possible for Vance and Eve Dingman. He acknowledged that the case had happened a long time ago and that many people in Rochester probably did not even remember it anymore, though the family members certainly did, as did the police and prosecutors who had worked on the case. Meanwhile, Robert's younger brother Jeffrey had already been released from prison years earlier. Under his plea deal, Jeffrey had been eligible for parole after serving his minimum sentence. In 2013, when Jeffrey was 31 years old, he appeared before the New Hampshire Parole Board. The board members were troubled by some aspects of Jeffrey's case. In a written statement he had submitted before his hearing, Jeffrey described his conviction as being for his involvement in his parents' murders, which struck some board members as language that avoided taking full responsibility. When challenged on this during the hearing, Jeffrey stated more directly that he had killed his parents and took responsibility for it. Elizabeth Landry, the aunt who had lost her sister Eve in the murders, spoke at Jeffrey's parole hearing too. She expressed that she and her husband were willing to help Jeffrey have a second chance at life. She said they forgave him. The parole board expressed concerns about whether Jeffrey had the life skills necessary to function in society after spending more than half his life in prison. He had gone in as a barely 14-year-old child and was now a 31-year-old man who had little experience with everyday activities like managing money, using modern cell phones, or even going to movies. But they decided to grant him conditional parole. Jeffrey was released either in late 2013 or early 2014, depending on which sources you consult. He had earned his high school equivalency degree while in prison and found work at a steel mill after his release. Robert Dingman was not satisfied with his 40-year sentence. His lawyers appealed to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, arguing that a 40-year minimum sentence for someone who committed crimes as a juvenile was effectively the same as life without parole. They pointed out that Robert would not be eligible for parole until he was 57 years old. They argued this did not give him a realistic opportunity to build a meaningful life after prison. The defense even presented life expectancy data to argue that Robert might not live long enough after age 57 to have much of a life on the outside. The New Hampshire Supreme Court disagreed. In a 2021 ruling, the state's highest court upheld the 40-year sentence. The court rejected the argument that anything longer than 35 years without parole should automatically be considered the same as life in prison. They noted that the US Supreme Court had not established such a rule in its Miller decision. The court also chose to rely on life expectancy tables from the Centers for Disease Control, rather than the shorter life expectancy estimates provided by the defense, finding the CDC tables to be more reliable. Robert tried again in 2023 to get his sentence reduced. By this time, he had been in prison for over 25 years. His attorney argued that he had been a model prisoner who could benefit from transitioning to a minimum security unit and eventually a halfway house to help him gradually adjust to re-entering society. The prosecution opposed this, arguing it was too soon for another hearing and that Robert had not shown why such an extraordinary measure would be appropriate at that time. As of now, Robert Dingman remains in prison. If he continues to serve his sentence without any further changes, he will remain behind bars until at least 2035. At that point, he will have the opportunity to appear before a parole board and make his case that he has been rehabilitated and is ready to rejoin society. Whether that parole will be granted remains to be seen. The case of Robert and Jeffrey Dingman represents the complex intersection of juvenile crime, severe punishment, and evolving legal standards about how to treat young offenders. The Miller v. Alabama Supreme Court decision recognized that young people who commit even the most serious crimes might deserve a different kind of justice than adult offenders. But that recognition does not erase what happened to Vance and Eve Dingman on that Friday in February 1996. It does not change the fact that two parents came home from work expecting to eat Mexican food with their sons, and instead were shot to death in their own home. It does not undo the pain experienced by the extended family members who lost their loved ones. The Dingman case also raises difficult questions about family dynamics, teenage rebellion, and when strict parenting crosses into something that might drive desperate actions. Family members insisted that Vance and Eve were devoted parents who never abused their sons. But Jeffrey testified about being yelled at and hit for bad grades. A psychologist who testified for the defense at the 2018 resentencing hearing said Robert had suffered emotional and physical abuse in a loveless environment. The truth about what life was really like inside the Dingman household may be something we will never fully understand. What we do know is that two teenage boys believed their situation was so intolerable that killing their parents seemed like a solution. The case serves as a reminder that even families that appear normal from the outside can harbour serious problems. It demonstrates how teenage brains can lead young people to make catastrophically poor decisions with permanent consequences. And it illustrates the difficult balance the justice system must strike between punishing terrible crimes and recognising that young people have the capacity to change. For Robert Dingman, the question now is whether he has truly changed during his decades in prison, whether he has matured into someone very different from the 17-year-old who helped kill his parents. His fate will eventually rest in the hands of a parole board that will have to weigh his behaviour as an adult against the terrible actions he took as a teenager. Until then, he continues to serve his time, living with what he did and trying to become someone worthy of forgiveness, even if he cannot forgive himself. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.